Welcome. Come in, close the door behind you, and make yourself comfortable. Now listen carefully. There are days when we breathe simply out of habit, out of reflex, out of inertia, as if air were free, as if being alive were just another item on the to-do list. But there are other days, and maybe today is one of them, when the body pauses without warning, as if hearing something sacred amid the noise of the world. And in that pause, everything shifts. We don't really know when the detour began. Maybe it was somewhere between the breaking news and the dreams postponed, between unanswered emails and the weight on your chest you've learned to ignore. But one thing is certain. You didn't come here just to survive. You weren't born to drag your days like a sentence disguised as routine. You came here to be. You came here to be alive. But more than anything, you came to love. To be love. To be you. So make yourself at ease. Take a deep breath, because the journey back to you begins right here. Learn to breathe love. Air is a caress no one sees. A gift that enters uninvited, moves through us in silence, and reminds us that we are alive. We breathe and assume it's automatic, biological, involuntary. But there is a kind of breath that doesn't occur in the lungs but in the soul. One that doesn't inhale oxygen but meaning. And that breath, the real one, we've forgotten. Because breathing isn't the same as knowing we're breathing. Living isn't the same as feeling that life is loving us with every inhale. The universe gives us air as if offering permission, as if whispering, "Here you go, create." And we use it to chase after what pulls us further from ourselves. The miracle happens every second, but hurry makes it invisible. We fill ourselves with thoughts, with debts, with noise, with deadlines. And we forget to thank the breath that arrives without being asked. We become so busy trying to be someone that we forget to be human. We forget that before words, there was breath. That before verbs, there was exhalation. That we were breathed into being by a force that needs no name, but when it stops, nothing else matters. What if that air was the magnificent energy of the Creator? What if the most spiritual act was simply to pause, close our eyes, and receive the invisible gift that enters through the nose and brushes every inch of who we are? Because if anything has been freely given to us, every second, without judgment, contract, or condition, it is breath. You don't need to apologize to inhale it. You don't need to earn it. No sin can block you from receiving it. You only need to be here. You only need to be. Breath does not discriminate. It enters the chest of the one who weeps and the one who lies. It fills the bodies of the killer and the sage. It is the same for all, like true love, available, free, without owner. But we were taught to tighten it, to hold it back, to use it as if it were a weapon, for running, for impressing, for proving. And we forgot that breath, when offered in full, heals. We forgot that the chest was made to open, not to defend. That breathing is not just living, it is surrendering with elegance. It is saying to life, yes, I'm here. I still trust. Because sometimes that's all we need. A deep sigh, a space between thoughts, a moment in which everything stops and the body remembers it's not alone, that it is still inhabited by a loving intelligence that holds it, even when it's not understood. Breathing love isn't just a beautiful metaphor. It's one of the many forgotten truths, and perhaps the most important of all, because it is the prelude to our cyclical, changing existence, to constant evolution, to the magnificent organic rhythm that allows us to be creators, to remain life in motion, even when we are silent, even at rest, simply breathing God, in silence. And when you breathe with gratitude, in awe of life, breathing in creation, the wondrous game of which you're miraculously a part today, everything changes. The way you see, the way you speak, the way you embrace. You become softer, more present, more alive. You no longer need reasons to feel well. You only need to return to the place where it all begins, the breath. And this is where the journey begins, not with a lesson, not with a method, but with an open question, like a window that opens from within. When was the last time you breathed knowing that air was love? That life, despite everything, is still offering you its invisible embrace. That every inhale is permission to continue, to release, to create. But the human being didn't learn how to breathe. They were born breathing. It happened before they had a name, before they knew what life was, before they knew there was a body. The first proof of their arrival was air entering, like a guest who doesn't knock because they know the house is already theirs. No one taught them. No one guided them. It just happened, like sunrise, like love, like those things that don't need to be explained because they don't need to be. There is something non-negotiable in that first breath, something no technology has ever been able to replicate, something that happens without calculation, without formula, without protocol. A perfect synchrony between the body awakening and the world waiting. The air enters, and with it, everything begins. The blood organizes itself. The heart rehearses its new rhythm. Future ideas line up in some corner of time, waiting to be thought. And in the meantime, the body breathes, as an act of faith, as a signal of presence. From there on, everything else, words, mistakes, hugs, fears, songs, everything is born between an inhale and an exhale. Everything lives within that coming and going of something unseen, but somehow holding us. And yet, it's what we remember the least. We take it for granted, as if it were nothing, as if it weren't everything. Breathing is the only process the body does automatically, but also allows to be accompanied. An automatic system that can become manual when we need it. That makes it a bridge, a resource that asks for no tools, no conditions, only presence, only the will to be, not to change the world, but to inhabit it better. Think about this for a moment. Oxygen doesn't just keep your cells alive. It transforms everything you touch. Oxidation is the language through which the body converses with time. It's the art of aging with dignity. Breathing isn't just being alive. It is being. It is allowing every part of your body to receive a visit from the invisible, to let every corner light up from within. Nature breathes in 1,000 ways. A tree breathes through its leaves. A mountain breathes in silence. The sea exhales foam. The forest inhales moisture. Every landscape has its rhythm, and so does every human being. Some breathe as if asking forgiveness for existing. Some do it in panic, as if life is slipping away. Some breathe with the depth of those who have understood there's no rush, that everything arrives, that everything returns, that everything finds its place with time and air. Breath is the first tool of freedom. If you can regulate your breath, you can transform your inner state. You can shift the way you think, the way you react, the way you feel. You can turn a burst of anger into a moment of presence, an intrusive thought into a healing sigh, a dark night into a luminous pause, not because it's magic, but because it's simple. So simple it's hard to believe it works, but it does. You just have to try. The ancients knew this. The yogis, the Buddhists, the Sufis, they all agreed on one thing. The control of breath is the control of the mind, and not control as imposition, but as dance, as alliance. When you breathe well, you think better. When you breathe slowly, you feel more. When you breathe deeply, you love differently. It's not about complex techniques. It's about attention, about being there, about accompanying yourself with each inhale like you would accompany a sleeping child, quietly, tenderly, gratefully. There are people who breathe with guilt, as if they're using too much air, as if they're apologizing for taking up space, and there are others who barely breathe at all. They go through life in a kind of emotional apnea that leaves them just a bit too far from themselves, not because they don't know how to breathe, but because they've forgotten how peace feels. And in that forgetting, breath becomes a chore, a maintenance activity, as if it were just another physiological obligation, not an intimate ceremony that happens thousands of times a day. From Tibet to the jungles of the Americas, from Japanese gardens to African deserts, somehow everyone reached the same conclusion, that those who breathe without awareness live halfway, that there is a life more expansive, more lucid, more free, and it begins with a pause, with closing your eyes and returning to the origin, not to the past, but to the center. Some ancient texts said, breath is the conversation between the soul and the body, that with each inhale, the soul remembers it's here, that it hasn't left, that it hasn't given up. And with each exhale, the body replies, I still have strength. I still want to be here. There's still something worth staying for. This isn't just a beautiful idea. It's an experience anyone can have. All it takes is sitting down, closing your eyes and paying attention to the air coming in, not trying to control it, just following it, like walking beside a friend on a journey without a map. The rhythm appears on its own. The body finds its shape. The noise dissolves. Not all the noise, but enough to hear yourself again. And in that moment, something shifts. Maybe it's not visible. Maybe it's not spectacular, but it is felt. As if an inner part, forgotten, covered in dust, stirs and says, I'm here. I still can. I'm still alive. And that small awakening, that nameless feeling, becomes a certainty that needs no explanation. A certainty that says, I'm no longer escaping. I'm no longer ignoring myself. I'm here, with me. That's what air can do. Not solve everything, but remind you that you can still be present, that you can still look at the day from a different place, that you don't need to understand everything to begin again. Sometimes, all it takes is to sit down, drop your shoulders and let your body speak its oldest language, the rhythm, the pause, the gentle sway of a life that still breathes. There are bodies that learn to live tense, that carry their shoulders high like they're hiding secrets, that walk fast even when they have nowhere to go, bodies that got used to surviving instead of inhabiting themselves, not because they wanted to, but because no one taught them that peace isn't a luxury, a reward, or a privilege. It's a right. Breath holds the key, but not the kind that imposes itself like a technique or repeats itself like a formula. It holds the invisible key, the one that opens from within without making a sound, the one that doesn't change your life in 5 minutes, but changes the way life feels. A deep exhale might not solve a problem, but it can offer a moment without pressure, an inch of inner space, and sometimes that's enough. But life wasn't made to be lived in savings mode. Life was made to expand, for the chest to open like a flower and the air to enter like applause. Breathing with joy is an act of silent rebellion. It's not denial of difficulty. It's a loving response to what hurts. Some people embody it without knowing. Keanu Reeves, for example. An actor, yes, but also a symbol of another way of being in the world. He doesn't need to shout who he is. He doesn't wave his pain as a flag. He's lived it. He's walked through it. And he has chosen something rare in these times. To be kind. To be simple. To be someone who breathes with presence. There's a story few know. They say that during film breaks, Keanu didn't go to his trailer or ask for special treatment. He would sit and read, share a coffee, be one of many. And that, in a world where everything is measured in egos, is almost a miracle. It is a different kind of breath, one that doesn't ask for attention, one that simply is. That way of inhabiting air becomes contagious. It inspires. Not because it is perfect, but because it is real, because it doesn't impose, because it doesn't try to set an example. It is simply presence, like the wind, which doesn't ask permission to pass. It just moves through and leaves something behind, sometimes calm, sometimes momentum, but always something. Then there are those moments when love is breathed without words, like when someone truly listens, without checking the clock, without thinking of what they'll say next, just being there, in silence, in a gaze, in shared air. Breathing love is just that, letting someone else breathe with you, letting them feel they're not alone, that someone else is on the same frequency. And that is worth more than 1,000 speeches, more than any prescription, because the soul doesn't need explanations. It needs breath, it needs space, it needs pauses where it can feel itself again, and that space can't be bought. It must be offered, with time, with intention, with an inner rhythm measured not in seconds but in sincerity. Life becomes different when you allow for those spaces, when instead of rushing, you pause, when instead of filling, you empty, when instead of asking, you breathe. That's when everything shifts, not because the outside world suddenly improves, but because you no longer experience it from lack, but from the abundance of being alive. Of knowing that with every breath, the entire universe is telling you, you are still here, there is still time, you can still love more. Breathing love is also an act of self-care, not with control or guilt, but with tenderness. It's choosing which thoughts you let in, just as you choose which air you breathe. It's saying no to the noise when your body asks for silence. It's gifting yourself a pause when the world screams for haste. It's closing your eyes and feeling that what enters you isn't just oxygen. It is grace. It is presence. It is permission. And that's when everything becomes more beautiful. Not because it becomes perfect, but because it becomes real. Life isn't a flawless choreography. It's a sacred and awkward dance that flows best when we move to our own rhythm. And breath is the metronome, the guide, the pulse that reminds us we are still beating. Sometimes all it takes is a moment, a single minute of conscious breath, a sigh that doesn't flee but embraces, an exhale that doesn't release out of resignation but out of trust. Those small moments begin to build a different kind of living, a gentler one, clearer, freer. And when you begin to live that way, you also begin to be with others in a new way. You stop demanding so much. You stop expecting them to fill voids you can breathe into yourself. You begin offering presence instead of pressure, silence instead of judgment, love instead of expectation. And then relationships, too, begin to breathe. They soften, they loosen, they become home. Breathing love is, at its core, this: becoming a home. For yourself, for others, for the moment you're in. A home without walls, but full of warmth, without recipes, but full of soul, without dogmas, but in rhythm. Because at the end of the day, everything we need is in the air. We just have to learn how to receive it, to let it in, to honor it like the miracle it is, arriving without noise but full of purpose. And maybe that's all we really need to remember when everything feels unclear. As long as breath keeps coming in, we still have time to learn how to breathe love. And there is something beautiful about the fragility that holds us, that strange mix of bones, blood, and breath. And yet we go through life as if fragility were a flaw, as if sensitivity weren't a miracle, as if it weren't a triumph that something as delicate as air keeps us alive. As if it weren't an act of love that we get to exist without needing to understand it all. There's a scene in a movie that lingers. Bill Murray in Lost in Translation, sitting in a Tokyo hotel room. He says very little. He just breathes, looks out the window, and in that stillness, in that pause, everything is told. The character doesn't need to speak. He just breathes. And suddenly, we understand. We feel. Sometimes the deepest emotion needs no words, just presence. The same happens in real life. There are days when we don't know what to say to ourselves. We don't know how to hold ourselves, or what to ask, or from whom. And that's when remembering how to breathe without fear can make the difference between falling and staying afloat, not because air heals, but because it reminds us we're still here, and that if we're still here, something is still worth it. Breathing tenderly is not the same as breathing with control. It's not about inflating your lungs like balloons. It's not about executing the perfect technique. It's about listening to what your body asks for. Sometimes it wants depth. Sometimes softness. Sometimes it just wants us to stop demanding so much, to stop interrupting it with our mental checklists, to stop forcing it to perform, to simply let it breathe. There's an invisible dimension that opens when that happens, a kind of music that doesn't come from outside, but from within. It has no recognizable melody, but it calms. It brings order. It aligns. It's as if the body, once it feels heard, lets down its guard. And then the emotions let down their guard too. And the mind softens. And what felt urgent suddenly isn't. And what seemed impossible begins to breathe differently. That's what so many spiritual practices try to say, even when they disguise it with complex names. It's not magic, it's rhythm, it's synchrony, it's trust. It's letting the body become a home again, not a battlefield. And that doesn't happen by studying. It happens by staying, by pausing. In the exact moment you decide enough running, it's time to listen. Some people find that moment in a park, others in a cup of tea, others while hugging an animal who asks for nothing, others while watching the sea. It doesn't matter where. What matters is that the moment exists, that moment where you're not doing anything to achieve something. You're just being. And in that being, the breath finds its tone, like a song finally recognizing the voice of the one meant to sing it. There's a whole generation learning how to be present, not because it's trendy, but because they're tired of living numb, tired of running from themselves, tired of trying to fit into soulless molds. And in that awakening, many have realized it's not about doing more, but being better. Not about collecting empty goals, but about filling moments with depth. And that's where breath becomes an ally, a companion, a lantern. It starts small, a minute of silence, closing your eyes in the midst of chaos, not answering a message until your body says it's ready, letting the air in without anxiety, noticing how even that changes something, no matter how small. And then, without realizing it, it becomes part of you, not as an obligation, but as a way of life. Breathing well is not a technique. It's a philosophy, a way of being in the world, a wordless declaration. I'm here. I didn't leave. I didn't give up. I'm still willing to feel. And that, in these times, is already a revolutionary act. There is no single way to breathe, just as there is no single way to love. Some breathe with tight chests and still keep going. Some inhale deeply to gather courage before walking through an intimidating door. Some, in the middle of an argument, remember they can breathe slower, and everything changes. Some breathe quietly, in a corner, unnoticed, but with a fierce decision to keep on living. Everyone breathes as they can, as they learned, as life taught them. But there is something no one can deny. The quality of your breath is the quality of your presence. The air you allow in doesn't just give you oxygen, it gives you space. Space to return to yourself. Space not to react from the wound. Space not to repeat the old story. Space to choose differently. And that space is worth more than 1,000 words. It's no accident that people say their breath was taken away when they fall in love, or that pain makes breathing hard, or that in deep peace, everything seems to float. Breath is the backdrop of all we are. It's there, even when we don't see it, holding us every moment, like an invisible mother asking for no recognition, only presence. And when you start to live with that awareness, everything transforms, not suddenly, not like a grand revelation, but like a soft dripping that, over time, soaks everything. You begin to eat more slowly, to see differently, to answer with less urgency, to tolerate emptiness without needing to fill it. And above all, you begin to feel more worthy of being here. Because that, too, is part of the air. Dignity. To breathe without guilt. To breathe without permission. To breathe without owing anyone anything. Just for being alive. just because. Because there's an unspoken right that comes with that very first breath, the right to take up space in this world without having to justify it. And then we stop begging for validation. We stop running after things that don't soothe. We stop disguising fear as productivity, and we dare to truly be, with everything that comes with it, the awkward silence, the rising emotion, the aching memories, the dreams that resurface. To be is the hardest art and the most necessary. The beautiful thing is, it doesn't take anything external to do it. You don't need to travel far or read every book. All it takes is to close your eyes, bring your attention to the breath coming and going, and stay. Do nothing. Don't analyze. Just stay. And when that becomes a habit, the inner world begins to rearrange itself, as if the soul, finally given room to breathe, decided it could bloom again. That's when breathing becomes mystical. Not because it has magic powers, but because it brings us back to the miracle we forgot. The miracle of being alive. Of witnessing this body move, this mind dream, this heart that, despite it all, still feels. There's an old proverb that says, "He who controls his breath controls his destiny." But it's not referring to rigid control, the kind found in manuals and checklists. It speaks of the art of attuning oneself to the rhythm of existence, of knowing when to let go, when to move forward, when to wait, when to stay silent, when to speak. And all of that is learned when we listen to the body, not as an enemy, but as a wise companion. Sometimes the body asks for rest, and we don't hear it. Sometimes it wants to move, and we restrain it. Sometimes it needs silence, and we give it more noise. But when we listen, when we finally offer it real oxygen, both physical and symbolic, the body responds with gratitude. It relaxes, it opens, it becomes an ally. And when that happens, the soul smiles, because it understands that, finally, the home is ready to be inhabited, and then living becomes something else. Not necessarily easier, but truer, freer, more lucid. That's what's left behind when the practice ends, when the reading is over. Not another technique, not a task, but something far less visible and far more vital. The quiet certainty that at any moment you can return to yourself, that you need nothing more than your body and your will, that even if the world is collapsing, you can still close your eyes and breathe with dignity. And in that gesture, there is freedom, and in that freedom, beauty. But there are mornings when you wake up with a hollow soul, even if you've slept 8 hours and the sun knocks at the window, eager to come in. Days when the body is alive, but you are not. And on those days, no one tells you that maybe all you need is to remember how to breathe, not with your lungs, with your skin, with your open chest, with your heart made available. To breathe the way a joyful Sunday breathes, blowing bubbles into the air. The way a dog breathes when it sees its human friend again after days apart. The way the sea breathes when it sighs that eternal curve of joy against the shore. We aren't born knowing how to breathe love. We forget. And then, if we're lucky, we find it again. Sometimes that love reaches us like a whisper in our back. Other times, like a howl in the belly. Sometimes it looks like another person. Other times, like a flower. And sometimes, like ourselves, when we finally stop judging who we are. Learning to breathe love isn't a technique. It's a way of being, of seeing without squinting, of listening without planning your response, of touching without the urge to possess, of speaking without needing to persuade. It's remembering that love isn't a destination. It's the air that holds you up as you walk. There are no instructions, only presence. And then the miracle appears. In a small psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of Vienna, back in the 1930s, there worked a young nurse with more soul of a poet than of a medic. He was thin, restless, and scribbled verses on napkins, leaving them in the pockets of his patients like someone planting seeds in dry earth. One morning, a woman arrived dragging her gown and her silences. She refused to speak, to eat, even to look at herself in mirrors. Behind her file, only a line written by her sister. She no longer wants to live. For weeks, no one could reach her. Until one rainy afternoon, the nurse sat beside her and began reading aloud. Not one of his poems, a passage from a private diary written by a Mexican painter who had yet to become famous, who had yet to paint her iconic self-portraits, but who was already bleeding tenderness onto paper. Her name was Frida. "Feet, what do I need you for if I have wings to fly?" The woman lifted her head, that was all. But in a place where gestures were dust, lifting one's head was a fire. The nurse didn't celebrate. He kept returning each afternoon with more phrases. From letters Vincent van Gogh wrote to his brother Theo, from the journals of Virginia Woolf before the river, from the marginal notes of Tesla as he conversed with pigeons. Not about his inventions, but about his loneliness, his useless tenderness. One night, the woman approached a window, opened it, and took a deep breath. She didn't jump. She breathed. And the next day, she asked for a pencil and paper. She didn't draw. She didn't write. She just made a single line, long, slow, like the first faint beat of a returning heartbeat. But that line was a yes, and I'm still here. Decades later, at a symposium on art and mental health, someone shared that the woman became an illustrator of children's books, that she never spoke much again, but in each stroke there lived a tenderness that no one could quite explain. And the nurse? His name was Elias Goldman. He died in the war, remembered by no one. But perhaps, somewhere in the quiet corner of a library, a child is flipping through a book full of soft drawings and vivid colors. And perhaps, unknowingly, they're reading the line that once saved a life. You don't need a war to discover peace, nor a hospital to recognize tenderness. Sometimes, all it takes is a line on a page for the soul to decide to stay. Sometimes, all it takes is a breath. And the real problem is that, without meaning to hurt us, they taught us to hold back tears, to hide tenderness, to silence the tremble of a caress that never reached its destination. Since childhood, we were trained in survival, but not in presence. Our mouths filled with words, but our bodies lacked soul. And so we grew, armed to the teeth with fears that weren't even ours, ready to dodge pain, but never prepared for miracles. Love became something strange to us, a rare occurrence in films and books, too vast to fit in our chest. And when it finally arrived, we didn't know how to hold it. We mistook it for desire, for attachment, for urgency. We dressed it in promises, contracts, expectations. And when it left, we blamed it for going, never admitting we didn't know how to breathe with it. To love without knowing how to breathe love is like trying to dance without having heard the music, like trying to hug without having released your fear, like reaching for the light with eyes shut from the inside. The problem isn't that we lack love, it's that we've forgotten how to breathe it. The breath of love doesn't pass through the lungs. It doesn't follow a regular rhythm or come from yoga classes. It's a subtle pulse that begins when judgment falls silent. It's a warm trembling that arises from the center of the chest when we stop needing to be right. Breathing love is allowing the other to exist without trying to fix them. It's looking without tightening. It's letting go without running. It's staying without owning. It's feeling without bracing. And that way of breathing can't be taught through formulas or phrases. It must be remembered. Because once, long ago, we all knew how to do it. In another life, in a dawn of childhood, in some untouched corner of the soul, not yet polluted by the noise of who we're supposed to be. There, where we still breathe slowly. There, where we still love without fear. Fortunately, the world is still oxygen to those who dare to breathe life authentically. That's why some speak with their mouths closed and others scream with their eyes. Some sing with their bodies. And those who dance with their wounds. They say that a man who had always loved with his soul once felt one afternoon that he simply couldn't do it anymore. Not because he had grown cynical, nor because someone had betrayed him. He simply couldn't. People offered him hugs, and they hurt. They said, "I love you," and it echoed like a voice from far away. One friend told him it was stress. Another said he needed a vacation. A third, more spiritual, recommended he return to meditation. But none of it felt true to him. One night, as he looked at his reflection in the mirror, he understood. He hadn't stopped loving. He had simply stopped breathing. Because when the body stays contracted for years, out of fear, out of guilt, out of caring for everyone but oneself, there comes a moment when there is no room left for love. Because love is not a feeling, it is a frequency. And that frequency needs space, air, pause, presence. Love is an extended breath. And if your chest is always clenched, it cannot come in. It's no coincidence that when someone is in pain, their breath becomes short and broken. Or that when someone loves without fear, they breathe deeply, as if their soul had finally found its true size. There's a truth that no one teaches in school. Those who breathe with fear, love with fear. Those who breathe with guilt, love by begging. And those who do not breathe, love the best they can. The trouble is, we go through life believing we lack affection, attention, a partner, touch, validation, when in truth, what we lack is emotional oxygen. You cannot speak of love without speaking of the body, and you cannot speak of the body without speaking of the story it carries, because the body remembers every time we swallowed a no for fear of rejection, every time we accepted a hug we didn't want, every time we pretended to be fine just to avoid bothering someone else, every time we didn't cry so that others wouldn't worry. And all of that doesn't just stay in the mind. It stores itself in the shoulders, in the jaw, in the back, in the diaphragm. The body becomes a backpack of unspoken emotions. And when it's too full, there's no more room for love. Because if we don't learn to breathe, we'll never learn to let go. And if we don't learn to let go, we'll only know how to hold on. And if all we know is how to hold on, we will never truly love. There's a question that very few people ask themselves when they're feeling sad. Where am I clenching on the inside? In my chest, my stomach, my throat? And more importantly, how long have I been holding my breath without realizing it? So many people go years without ever fully exhaling. They breathe halfway. They live tense, as if something might explode at any moment. And then they wonder why they can't enjoy the love that's already present in their lives. The body that doesn't breathe doesn't receive. It doesn't receive affection. It doesn't receive tenderness. It doesn't receive joy, even when life places it right in front of them. And it's not that the body is broken. It's that it's in defense mode. And do you know what activates that defense mode? Memory. The body remembers the day someone hugged you to manipulate you. It remembers when someone said, "I love you," and then left. It remembers that the last time you opened completely, someone used your vulnerability as a weapon. And so, every time love appears again, instead of opening, the body closes. Even if the soul says, "Yes," the body says, "Don't trust this." It's as if part of you knows what's being offered is real, but another part quietly wonders, what if this time they destroy me too? Because healing the heart is beautiful, but if we don't free the body, love can't come in. And I'm not talking about sophisticated breathing techniques. You don't need to go on a retreat. You don't need to do yoga at the top of a mountain. All you need is to recognize where you are holding back. Where are you clenching yourself to fit in? Where are you holding everything in so you don't explode? Where are you suppressing yourself so you don't make anyone uncomfortable? Breathing, when it's conscious, is not just a biological function. It's an emotional key. Each inhale can be an "I give myself permission." Each exhale, a "no more." That's why, in this first message, I'm not going to ask you to remember how to love. That will come later. First, we're going to relearn how to breathe, but not just breathe air. Breathe permission. Breathe rest. Breathe tenderness. Because when the body begins to let go, the soul begins to sing, And then love no longer needs to be chased, only received. There are days when the body wakes before the mind. It gets up, it moves, it does what it has to do, but no one is home inside. Like an actor who knows the script by heart, repeating each gesture with the precision of someone who's rehearsed the role of functional person for years. And yet, something's missing, the sensation of being present. Breathing is not just taking in air. It's allowing awareness to enter the chest and expand. It's letting the soul say, "I'm here." But when the body has been trained to survive, presence feels like a luxury, one we don't believe we deserve. We were taught to think carefully before feeling, to plan before flowing, to control before trusting. And under those rules, the body became a soldier. It obeys, it tenses, it hardens, it adapts. But in that process, it loses its most sacred quality, sensitivity. A body that no longer feels is not a dead body, but it is a disconnected one. And that disconnection makes it deaf to love, even when love is right there, whispering into its ear. The body that doesn't feel, doesn't listen. And if it doesn't listen, it doesn't respond either. It waits for a signal that has already come, but can no longer be recognized. Love doesn't enter as an idea. It enters as a vibration, as if the universe were breathing with you, and in that shared rhythm, the soul remembered its home. But for that to happen, the body must be willing to lower its guard, to stop anticipating the wound, to stop living in defense mode. And for many, that feels like dying, because if I let down my guard, who will protect me? If I'm not alert, who will stop me from getting hurt again? If I relax, won't I become vulnerable? Yes, you will become vulnerable, but that is exactly the way through. You can't breathe love through a shield. Love needs cracks, space, emotional vents through which it can sneak in without asking permission. The armor protects, but it also suffocates. And love, brother, does not arrive with swords. It arrives with empty hands. That's why we must approach the body like entering an ancient temple covered in dust, without judgment, without haste, only with curiosity and reverence. Because the body remembers more than we think. It remembers what we silence so we wouldn't be abandoned. It remembers what we faked to be accepted. It remembers the nights without hugs, the days without tenderness, the glances that judged, the words we swallowed out of fear of making noise. Every muscle has its story. Every breath is a form of asking forgiveness for having stopped listening to ourselves. And so, the inevitable question arises, how do I begin to breathe love? How do you do it after years of breathing on autopilot, like someone just trying to make it to the end of the day without collapsing? You begin with a pause, a small one, a moment where you stop, not to think, but to notice. Where am I tense? Where am I clenching without realizing it? Where am I pretending it doesn't hurt? Conscious breathing is not just a technique. It's an act of honesty, a way of telling your body, you don't have to protect me all the time anymore. I'm here, with you. You're not alone. There is a simple practice, almost invisible, yet profoundly healing, to exhale slowly, as if releasing the weight of 5 lifetimes. You don't need to know anything about meditation. You only need to give yourself permission to pause and notice how you breathe when you're not trying to prove anything. That moment, however small, is a miracle. Because in that pause, the body begins to remember what it feels like to be inhabited without fear. And when that happens, something shifts. The gaze softens, the voice loses its hardness, the back stops carrying what no longer belongs. The body begins to sense that not all touch is a threat, that not all love ends in abandonment, that there are embraces that do not suffocate but set you free. And that shift, subtle as it may be, marks the beginning of a new relationship with oneself. It's as if the body whispers, maybe this time it's safe to open. Maybe this time I won't be hurt for loving. In that process, memories inevitably arise. Not the ones stored in the mind, but the ones printed on the skin, in the diaphragm, in legs that still tremble, even though no one is chasing them anymore. Sometimes, one deep breath is enough to trigger tears without warning, and those tears aren't weakness, they are cleansing. They are the body's way of saying, finally. Finally, you listened. Finally, you stopped demanding perfection. Finally, you let go of the need to be strong. And now that you're here with me, I can breathe. It's then that meditation ceases to be a spiritual practice and becomes a homecoming. Meditation is not about emptying the mind. It's returning to the body like someone returning to an old house that still holds pictures in its drawers. It's sitting on the sofa of the chest, opening the windows of the abdomen, airing out the rooms where pain was stored in boxes labeled with other people's names. It's sweeping without anger, cleaning without guilt, breathing without a goal, just being. And when you manage to do that, even for a few seconds, love begins to bloom, not as overflowing passion, not as urgent desire, but as a warm breeze that enters through the open window of the soul, a breeze that doesn't demand, doesn't push, doesn't interrupt. It simply arrives, like someone who's waited for years for you to be ready to receive, like someone who's been there all along, quietly honoring your pace. Loving is not something you do, it's something you allow, and the first thing you must allow is to breathe. In a corner of the world where few ever look, a woman stood before a sculpture in Florence. It was Michelangelo's David. She had seen it in books, on postcards, on t-shirts and coffee mugs, but never in person. And that morning, standing there, she didn't think about art. She thought about her ex-husband, about how he always told her not to cry, not to be so dramatic that her sensitivity was a problem. And as she stared at that perfect marble statue, she thought, this is the man he wanted me to be, hard, without organs, without tears. And so she cried. She cried as she hadn't since she was 15. She cried standing there, surrounded by hundreds of tourists, and didn't care. Because something in that flawless marble made her realize that she hadn't been loved. She had been molded. Her body, her breath, her laughter had all been edited to fit into an ideal that wasn't even hers. She cried because her body finally told her, enough. I no longer want to be a statue. I want to be flesh again. Flesh that trembles, breathes, sings silly songs, and sighs without explanation. To breathe love is to remember that you don't have to carve yourself into stone to be worthy, and that if someone only loves you when you are still, silent, and perfect, that's not love. That's sculpture. There are many men and women walking through the world with the soul of Frida Kahlo and the back of Atlas. They carry everything. They feel everything. But they've convinced themselves that showing it is weakness. Because when they were children, they were told that crying was foolish, that doubting was a waste of time, that fear was a sin. And now they move through life with forced smiles and stomachs at war, bodies that laugh with their mouths but sweat anxiety through their armpits, bodies that pretend to be fine while quietly planning how to escape themselves. The body is the silent stage where our untold stories live. It's where tensions accumulate, where memories and unshed fears linger. If love doesn't enter, it's often because it finds no space, because the chest is tight, the breath is shallow, the jaw is clenched, and the back carries more than it can bear. Opening the body to love is not a metaphor. It's physical, real, every day. And it begins with breath, deep breath, slow breath, conscious breath. Not as someone filling a tank with air, but as someone honoring life with every inhalation. When you breathe, your body expands. And when it expands, it stops defending, stops fleeing, stops pretending. There's a story that stayed with me since I first heard it. They say that Paramahansa Yogananda, the great mystic who brought Eastern spirituality to the West, didn't observe his disciples for how they meditated or how much they knew, but for how they breathed. He said breath was the only prayer you couldn't fake, that you could lie with words, with gestures, with intentions, but never with breath. That someone who breathed tenderly was already closer to love than someone reciting 1,000 mantras without feeling. The one who could sit in silence and simply inhabit their breath was worthy of receiving the highest truths. That image never left my body, because beyond the spiritual or mystical, there is something deeply human in how we breathe the world. There are those who breathe as if apologizing for existing, those who inhale with fear and exhale with judgment, those who breathe as if life were a race, and others as if all the love they need is in the next breath. And sometimes you reach a point on the path when you realize something, not because you read it in a book, not because someone said it with a wise voice, but because your body no longer wants to breathe the way it used to. It wants to be inhabited differently. And that's when the real journey begins. The truth is, many people don't know how to breathe, not because they lack oxygen, but because they have too much fear. They live holding their breath, clenching their souls, tensing their chests, pressing their lips together so that not even a single emotion escapes. They think this protects them, that it's how they survive, that it's how no one will see how much love they carry inside. But they're wrong, because love, when not breathed, begins to rot. To breathe love is not a metaphor. It's as real as sleeping, crying, or feeling hunger. It's something you learn, something you practice, something you forget, something you relearn. It is a way of being in the world, not as someone defending themselves, but as someone surrendering without disappearing, as someone who loves without being afraid to vanish. Sometimes, life gets so loud that we stop hearing the rhythm of our own breath. And then we start chasing things we don't need, people who don't listen, goals that drain our souls, all because we don't know how to stop. Because we don't know how to say, wait, I want to return to myself. I want to return to the place where it all began. I want to return to breathing love. And that is where this journey begins. Not in an airport, not in a bookstore, not on a mystical mountain. It begins in one tiny instant. In the exact moment you decide that you will no longer survive another day without inhabiting yourself. That moment when you say, in a voice barely audible but with the full force of the universe, I want to feel again. It's not about finding a partner. It's not about healing a trauma. It's not about building a perfect life. It's about learning to be present without fear, to open the chest, even when it hurts, to let tenderness be stronger than defense, to allow your own presence to be enough, without needing applause, without needing validation, expecting nothing but the feeling of being alive. To breathe love is to remember what you already knew before they taught you to fear, before you confused demand with affection, before you believed that to be loved, you had to stop being yourself. The first time you truly breathe love, you realize you were never broken. You were starved of affection. You weren't complicated. You were lost. You weren't too sensitive. You were incredibly brave for continuing to feel in a world that begged you to go numb. To breathe love doesn't make you more fragile. It makes you more human. And when humanity is real, it is always indestructible. I remember a woman who once told me she couldn't cry, not even at funerals, not even during sad movies. She said she felt emotion, but didn't know how to release it. She had learned to swallow tears like bitter pills, quickly and without thinking. One day, during a conversation, I looked into her eyes and said, "Breathe as if someone had just hugged you without asking why you were sad." And she did. She closed her eyes, dropped her shoulders, and for the first time in years, her eyelashes grew wet. Not from sorrow, from relief. This is what love does when it is breathed. It doesn't promise perfection. It only promises you won't be alone inside, that something within you has finally chosen to stay. Breathing love is not a technique. It's a quiet decision. It's looking at yourself in the mirror without judgment. It's hearing a song and letting it move through you. It's cooking for yourself as if you were your favorite guest. It's writing something beautiful without expecting anyone to read it. It's giving yourself what you always hope to receive from others, without resentment, without resignation, but with tenderness. Because no one is going to love you exactly the way you imagined. But if you start breathing love, if you learn to treat yourself the way you'd treat someone you truly love, something in the universe rearranges. The pieces fit. Time stretches. Wounds heal without haste. And not because the world outside has changed, but because you're no longer running from yourself. You're no longer waiting to be rescued. You saved yourself the moment you chose to stay. You don't have to do anything epic. You don't have to give speeches or record a podcast or write a poem that goes viral. You just have to stay with yourself a little longer. Breathe. Feel. Do nothing but be there. Inhabit yourself, like someone coming home after years of absence. And if, in that silence, pain surfaces, memories, trapped emotions, let them come. Don't censor them. Don't label them. Let them breathe too. They've been waiting for that moment as well. They also want to be seen. They too want to return to love. Because everything that isn't transformed into love becomes shadow. So breathe. Not just air. Breathe tenderness. Breathe permission. Breathe companionship. Breathe the memory of all you've been and all you can become again. Breathe like someone unafraid to feel. Like someone who knows that even when it hurts, they're not alone. Like someone who has discovered their soul doesn't want to escape. It wants to live softly within the body. This isn't a formula. It's not a 5-step method. It's a reminder, a door, a mirror, a voice that doesn't shout but stays, an invisible hand that doesn't drag you but walks beside you. Breathing love isn't something you learn. It's something you remember. And now that you are remembering, now that something inside is softening, now that you feel a quiet knot in your throat, not sadness, not joy, but return, now you can begin. There is a kind of breath that makes no sound. It is the soul's breath when it finally feels at home. The chest doesn't rise, the body doesn't shake, there's no spectacle, it just happens. As if a part of you that had been wandering for years found its place in silence. That's what happens when you stop looking for love in the wrong places and begin to allow it to be breathed from within. Most people don't have broken hearts. They have tired hearts. Tired of pretending they don't feel. Tired of waiting for the right moment to express themselves. Tired of trying to fit into molds that don't recognize them. Breathing love is giving that heart a rest. It's taking off the armor. It's letting it beat without shame. You don't need a grand story to do this. You don't need a cosmic revelation or a spiritual retreat. One gesture is enough. A quiet cup of coffee, an honest look in the mirror, a song you don't skip, a tear you don't explain. Every simple act can be a ritual if done with love, and every small ritual is an act of healing. Breathing love is exactly that, turning the ordinary into a miracle. And do you know what's most beautiful? When you begin to breathe love, you begin to spread it. Without saying anything, without teaching, without forcing, people feel it. Not because you're perfect, not because you have it all figured out, but because you're present. Because there's coherence in your gaze, presence in your silence, peace in your way of being. Love that is breathed becomes love that expands. Sometimes people ask me if it's possible to trust again after a deep wound. I always say the same. It's not about trusting others. It's about trusting yourself not to abandon who you are. When you learn to listen to yourself, to honor yourself, to give yourself a voice, then you can trust. Because no matter what happens, you'll be there for you. Breathing love doesn't mean living without pain. It means living without abandonment. And that changes everything. I wrote this for you. For that part of you that has always been there. The one that endured. The one that kept walking even when no one applauded. The one that fell and made no noise. The one that cried in places where crying wasn't allowed. The one that looked up at the sky more than once and silently asked, "When will it be my turn?" Brother, it's your turn now. Not because everything is fine, but because you now know it doesn't have to be perfect for you to breathe again. And it's not about learning to love. It's about remembering that you are love. The problem was never that you didn't know how to love. The problem was that you were taught to doubt your nature, that you confused love with sacrifice, that you believed loving meant disappearing for someone else. But no, loving is appearing. It's being present. It's saying, I'm here, without ceasing to be yourself. Love is not something to beg for. It's something to share. And if there's no one to share it with, then share it with yourself. Because you too are worthy of receiving what you give. And if you don't know how to start, begin with the simplest thing. Breathe. Once, twice, 3 times. Do it without intention, just to be, just to give yourself a space, just to allow yourself to exist without demands. Every conscious breath you take is a rebellion against everything that tried to disconnect you from yourself. It is a reconnection to what matters. It is proof that you are here, alive, willing to feel again, even if a part of you still fears it. And that, brother, is more than enough. You don't need a perfect life plan. You don't need an enlightened partner. You don't need constant validation. You just need to recover your breath and remember that love is not something you find. It's something you allow. Some people will come into your life and won't understand this journey. That's okay. Others will see it and say nothing, but silently you'll be giving them permission to breathe too. Because every time someone dares to inhabit themselves with tenderness, another soul somewhere breathes easier. That's how real love works. It doesn't scream, it expands. So breathe. Breathe love as if it were your only religion. Breathe as if that act alone could bring you back to life. Breathe like someone who has decided to live inside themselves. Because that's what you're doing now. You're coming back. You're coming back to you. You're coming home. And when someone asks what you did to heal, you can say, I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just learned to breathe love. And that was enough. Fear lives in contraction. Love in openness. So every time you feel your body tense, contracted, impatient, don't judge it. Give it air. Breathe through your nose, gently, deeply, feeling the air pass through your throat, fill your chest, reach your belly. Stay there for a few seconds. Exhale slowly as if releasing a story you no longer need. Repeat. Once, twice, 5 times. That is love in the shape of oxygen. And along with breath, move with presence. Stretch your neck. Roll your shoulders. Walk without rushing. Make eye contact. Feel your skin, your back, your feet on the ground. The body needs to know it is not in danger, that it can rest, that it can receive. Close your eyes now and then and place a hand on your heart. Not to say anything, just to listen. Sometimes there's nothing to do, only to feel. Love doesn't always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it comes as a whisper. Once in a talk, Sadhguru said something that hovered in the air like a butterfly aware of its own importance. Your breath is the only thing you truly have. Everything else can change. But if you're breathing, you can still transform your life. And that, though it sounds obvious, is revolutionary. Because there are people with diplomas, travel miles, followers, children, dogs, premium accounts, and passports full of stamps, but they don't allow themselves to breathe. Not deeply, not in silence, not in peace. There are people who live as if auditioning for a reality show every morning. They wake up in character, the successful one, the high-functioning one, the woman who can do it all, the man who never breaks. And that script is so tight, there's no space for breath. There's no space for love if you're constantly performing. Breathing love is taking off the costume in the middle of the supermarket. It's dropping the armor during a Zoom call. It's saying, I don't know, with kindness. It's asking for help without your voice cracking from shame. It's walking down the street like someone who knows they're under construction, not complete. As Daniel Habif would say, with that blend of humor and wisdom, I'm made of pieces, but with them, I have built cathedrals. You cannot build a love that's real unless you've first allowed yourself to be ruined. And you cannot love from a body that has spent centuries cinched by the corset of perfection. That's why art has so much to teach us, because art doesn't aim to please. It aims to express. A painting doesn't ask for permission. A song doesn't apologize. And yet, a single note can open the heart more than 10 years of therapy. Why? Because art breathes without fear. Art doesn't compensate. It overflows. And that's what many people need to remember. That true love isn't about pleasing others, but about breathing from within. That there are kisses that kill when given from guilt. That there are hugs that suffocate when born from the fear of loss. That there are I love yous disguised as emotional blackmail. And that only a body breathing in peace can love without chains. A friend once told me that after years of meditating, attending retreats, learning about chakras, crystals, mantras, and family constellations, what transformed her the most was something her 6-year-old daughter said while they were cooking. "Mom, when you get mad, you forget how to breathe." That sentence froze her, because it was true. When things didn't go her way, her breath disappeared. Literally. Her chest would freeze in a suspended exhale, and it reminded her of her childhood, of how, every time someone got angry, she learned to hold her breath. Because speaking was dangerous, because crying was too much, because existing was a threat. And that stayed in the body. And that's what the body repeats until one finally sits down with it, looks at it like a wounded animal and says, "I promise you no longer have to be afraid." That's the love that heals. The love we give ourselves first, not with sugary affirmations or fridge magnet mantras. The love that begins with breathing in respect toward ourselves. Breathing love is the art of making space. Space for sadness, for desire, for pleasure, for emptiness, for silly laughter, for new dreams, and for those that will never be. It's looking at the body and saying, "I won't keep squeezing you to fit into what others expect of me." It's looking again at our scars as naturally as one looks at a map. It's letting the back stop being a library of guilt, and the neck no longer a hangar for swallowed silence. And if one day someone hugs you and you feel your body doesn't close up, that your breath doesn't hide, that your heart doesn't tremble with fear but expands like a calm ocean, then you'll know you've begun to truly breathe love. And that can't be taught. That is remembered. And you, now, are remembering. In a quiet corner of the world where few ever look, a taxi driver in Casablanca pulled over by the sea. He had no passengers, no rush. He had something rarer still, sadness. He turned on the radio and Edith Piaf was singing "Non, je ne regrette rien." He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and thought, "I don't even know what I'm grieving, but I know there's something inside me I still haven't cried out." That man didn't meditate. He didn't do yoga. He didn't read self-help books. But in that moment, unknowingly, he did the most sacred thing a body can do for itself. He stopped and breathed his sadness without resisting it. He opened the door to pain like someone welcoming the most feared guest. And nothing happened. And everything happened. Because love, that real love most think only exists in romantic relationships or Woody Allen films, starts right there. When you stay with yourself without asking your soul to hurry up and heal. Because there are wounds that don't want to be healed. They just want to be seen without judgment. Like an old scar that no longer hurts, but still remembers. Today the world is full of people who breathe as if they were running away. Who walk fast, eat fast, love fast, and suffer fast. Not because they want to, but because no one taught them another way. And after so much hurrying, the body begins to defend itself from time, as if time were an enemy. Once during a talk in Kyoto, a 93-year-old woman named Noriko, with eyes like full moons, said something that left the auditorium in complete silence. People think they can't love because they're afraid, but in truth, they can't love because they don't breathe enough to house love in their bodies. And no one laughed, because deep down everyone knew it was true. Love is not a thought, it's a guest, and it does not enter a house where there's no oxygen. Some believe loving is saying it, others believe loving is showing it. But those who have truly suffered, those who have hit emotional rock bottom and still chosen to rise, know that loving begins with being able to sit with oneself without pretending. And that, brother, takes practice. Not the practice of techniques, but the practice of presence. That's why, when people talk about meditation, they imagine a monk still in a cave in Nepal, breathing incense and thinking about nirvana. But meditating, as Krishnamurti said, without ornamentation, is observing without interfering. And that can be done by a child on a swing, a mother cooking, or a gardener sweeping dry leaves in Istanbul. Breathing love is observing without judging what's inside. It's realizing that sometimes there's no calm, and that's okay. It's seeing fear and not demanding an explanation. It's letting the body tremble without shame. It's saying, I don't know how to love, and continuing to breathe anyway. Many believe evolution is about becoming stronger, but in truth, evolution is becoming tender without losing firmness. Firm like a tree, tender like a song by Caetano Veloso. There are stories that could be told 1,000 times and never lose their power, like the Ukrainian dancer who, in the middle of war, danced atop rubble while bombs fell far away, but sadness fell nearby. He danced not to forget, but to make space for the love still left in his body. That's what we forget, that loving is an act of resistance, that breathing love in a world that demands speed, toughness, success, and control is a radical act of humanity. Because love is not just a relationship, it's a way of being in the world. It's how you look at the person cleaning your street, how you listen to someone who disagrees with you, how you speak about yourself when you make a mistake, how you treat your body when no one is watching. Loving is how you settle into bed, the way you choose not to answer a painful message with one that wounds, the way you make yourself tea without checking the time. And to do all of that, you need one thing: air available for the soul. Do you know what happens when a body fills with air without fear? The soul feels welcome. It doesn't need to hide or justify itself. It stays, and that's when real love begins. That's why the wise ones of the East didn't teach love as a theory. They taught it as a practice of bodily presence. And the Stoics knew this too, when they said the soul must be trained each day like an invisible muscle. Seneca once said, "No one loves another who has not made themselves lovable to themselves." And by lovable, he didn't mean nice. He meant habitable, to inhabit yourself without war, without demands, without masks, because no one can love from a body that hasn't been allowed to be home. Sometimes all it takes is a silence for the body to begin remembering, not an awkward silence or a catalog spiritual silence, a simple silence, like the kind in a room where no one is pretending anymore. There, when there's no longer any need to defend, something ancient awakens. It's effortlessness in tenderness, breath without surveillance, love without a script. There are those who discover this not in a retreat, nor in a book, but on an ordinary night, standing before a window with a warm cup between their hands. Nothing extraordinary happens, only the rain falls. But in that instant, the body lets go. And that simple surrender is, without knowing it, a greater act of love than 1,000 declarations. The problem was never the absence of love. It was the absence of space to feel it. A body saturated with judgment, tension, and rules has no room to host something so subtle. That's why, when we talk about healing, it's not about chasing light in some distant corner of the universe. It's about moving the furniture that blocks the window. The light was already there. We just had to let it in. There's a scene from real life that happened in a train station in Prague a few years ago. A young violinist played a piece by Smetana with breathtaking mastery. No one looked at him. Everyone hurried past, until a small child stopped. He couldn't have been older than 5. He closed his eyes and simply listened. He didn't ask for money, didn't ask questions, didn't try to record it. He was just there, present, moved, breathing in rhythm with the notes. The honesty of that moment was so powerful that little by little people began to pause, to put away their phones, to lower their voices, to stand still, as if the child had remembered something everyone else had forgotten, that the purest things in life aren't captured. They're breathed. That is what it means to learn to breathe love. It's not about techniques, mantras, or formulas. It's about opening to the moment without conditions, about inhabiting the body as a temple with no surveillance, about letting love enter, not through reason but through silence. Love doesn't begin when we find someone who understands us. It begins when we stop using understanding as a shield. Because sometimes knowing everything is just a very elegant way to feel nothing. And if there's one thing love cannot stand, it's the elegance of control. That's why ancient cultures had ceremonies for weeping, singing, dancing in circles, and sweating together. Because they knew the body cannot store emotions like a vault. Everything unexpressed turns into weight, and what accumulates eventually explodes, not in the mind, but in the body. How many times is anxiety nothing more than bottled up love? How many times is anger simply sadness without permission? How often is lack of desire just a soul worn down from giving too much without ever being heard? Breathing love is, then, an act of humility, to recognize that we can't do this alone, that we don't need answers, that sometimes just being present is enough. There's a lesser-known story about the French sculptor Camille Claudel. While Rodin was celebrated for his monumental works, Camille faded into criticism and obscurity. Yet in her smaller sculptures, her most intimate gestures, there is something Rodin could never replicate: the breath of marble. The hands touching aren't posed, they're pulsing. The curved backs aren't defeated, they're exhaling resignation and beauty at once. Camille didn't sculpt forms, she sculpted held breath. That is art, that is love, giving shape to the space between one emotion and another, honoring the silence between two breaths, trusting that what remains unsaid still has a voice. The same happens in our relationships. Some conversations feel like marble statues, cold, polished, correct, and some silences feel like an embrace in the middle of a storm. The difference lies in the air we let in whether we're trying to prove something or share it, in whether we listen to respond or to receive, in whether we're protecting an image or nurturing a bond. That's why, before trying to love someone else, it's worth sitting quietly and asking, does my body feel safe with me? Can it cry without being silenced? Can it laugh without being corrected? Can it desire without being judged? Can it be still without being rushed? If the answer is no, then the path is clear, not outward, inward, toward that place in the chest where an unspoken childhood lingers, where a breathless longing waits, where a tenderness still hopes to be seen. That's where the love that doesn't suffocate begins. Because it's not enough to say, I love you. You must know how to breathe with another, to share silence without filling it, to hold sadness without trying to fix it, to walk beside without dictating the pace. And all of this, yes, it can be learned, but not in books, not in quotes. It's learned by living with the body fully present. It's learned when you stop asking the world to love you and begin simply to stop interrupting yourself. It's learned when, after a hard day, you finally lie down in bed and instead of seeking distraction, you stay and you breathe. And even if it hurts, even if it scares you, even if it feels like little, that gesture is the beginning of everything. To love is to breathe together without anesthesia. And in this art, each of us is our own teacher. We just have to remember how it was done and begin again. In the instant the body begins to breathe naturally, without effort or command, the soul settles in, as if at last it found a room of its own, not big, not new, but its own, and at peace. That happens when all the necessary tears have been shed, when silence no longer weighs, but accompanies, when there's no need to be right or understood, when the body stops wrestling with its story, when it simply allows itself to be. And yet we still haven't spoken of the most invisible thing, the thing that, even in the midst of breath, healing, and love, remains unresolved. Guilt, that emotional residue that clings to the ribs like dry dust. Guilt for not having loved sooner, for having done it wrong, for not knowing how to protect ourselves, for having given too much, for not living up to the person we dreamed of being. Guilt is the final layer, the thinnest, the most persistent, and until it is exhaled, love cannot circulate fully. Because guilt cannot be erased by thinking. It is released by forgiving the body, forgiving it for trembling when it shouldn't have, for staying silent when it should have screamed, for desiring what it wasn't allowed to, for loving what didn't love it back, for surviving instead of shining. The body doesn't need correction. It needs absolution, and it doesn't come through doctrine or virtue. It comes through contact, through kindness, through that one caress that exists for no other reason than to whisper, "You can stay here." A body that feels inhabited without judgment begins to lay down its weapons, and in that, a new kind of breath is born, a breath with no orders, no punishment, no waiting, a free breath, one that feels a lot like love, but something more still remains, something we cannot leave out, not if we want this work to be eternal, not if we want this chapter to live inside those who hear it. What's missing is to speak of faith, not the religious kind, not ideological. Faith as a physiological act. Faith as the simple fact of continuing to breathe when nothing makes sense, because every human being at some point has breathed with faith without knowing it. When they waited in a hospital, when they held the hand of someone leaving, when they said goodbye, knowing it was forever, when they kept going, even without hope. That is faith. And faith, at its core, is pure love. Love that doesn't rely on results. Love that asks for no explanation. Love that breathes even when there is no air. And there, in that embodied faith, art appears. That bridge between the invisible and the everyday. Because when a painting, a song, a film, or a poem makes us cry for no reason, what it really does is open the chest to let in the emotional oxygen that was being held in. Here's what happens in a shot by Wong Kar-wai, in a line by Clarice Lispector, in a song by Mercedes Sosa that arrives without warning. Art does not explain, it evokes. It doesn't teach, it awakens. It doesn't offer answers, it asks better questions. And what makes that miracle possible is a body already willing to feel. It doesn't need to understand. It just wants to open. Because art is not consumed, it is breathed. And the air it brings is not just any air. It is love in the form of beauty. When we speak of love, we're not talking about romance, but of something essential. Of that primal bond we have with life itself. The way we put on a shirt in the morning. The way we wash our face without hurry. The way we touch our chest when no one is watching. To love is to remember that all this, the body, time, silence, the background music from the street while we write or read, it's all sacred if we breathe it as such. There are places where time is measured not by clocks but by breath, where a conversation pauses if someone needs silence, where there is no rush to say what matters, where the soul is not a concept but something you feel in your back when you are aligned with who you are. In those places, love is not a goal, it is a way of walking. And the body is not a vehicle, but an altar, a space that deserves attention, listening, gratitude, because everything lives there. Breathing love is not an extraordinary event. It is a daily practice that begins when we stop demanding that the body be efficient and start allowing it to be human. It is not a mystical revelation, nor a radical life change. It is something more delicate, more intimate, more subversive. It's no longer asking the breath to be useful. It's letting it be what it is, a bridge between the invisible and who we are. Sometimes all the body asks for is a moment to remember it is alive, a nap without guilt, a bath without hurry, a walk without a destination, a cry without explanation. Sometimes all the body needs is permission, permission to be, to not fix anything, to not be brilliant, to not have answers, to simply be there with its imperfections, its rhythms, its memories. Breathing love is just that. Not asking for miracles, but realizing the miracle is already happening. There is no correct way to love, but there are more human ways to begin, and they all have something in common. The breath is present. It does not rush. It does not hide. It does not pretend. It just is. Like this, like now, like you, who have made it to the end of these opening pages. And even if you don't fully realize it yet, you are already breathing differently. Not because someone taught you, but because your soul is finally finding space. Sometimes nothing extraordinary needs to happen for your life to begin changing. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of silence between two thoughts, a pause between who you were and who you're about to become, a second in which the world asks nothing of you, where you are not required to have an answer, only to be, to inhabit, to breathe. There once was a woman living in a big city, overwhelmed by stimuli, always running, always solving, always on the edge. Every morning she opened her eyes as if throwing herself into an invisible war. And one night, while waiting for her phone to charge, her soul ran out of battery. She realized she had forgotten what it felt like to be with herself without wanting to escape. She sat on the floor, closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she heard the sound of her own breath when no one was judging. It was a small miracle, rediscovering herself alive without doing anything extraordinary, just by being, just by pausing. We live in an era where everything must have utility. Even silence has been colonized by apps that turn it into a product. But there's something that can't be bought or programmed. That moment when you become friends with the air entering and leaving your body. That instant when, without realizing, you are meditating. Not because you've crossed your legs, not because you lit incense, not because you read it in a book, but because the world has stopped pushing you outward and for 1 second, you've chosen to look inward. Ancient cultures knew everything begins with breath. The Egyptians called it K, the Greeks pneuma, the Hebrews ruach, the Hindus prana. They all agree what breathes in you is not just air, it is soul in motion. And yet, in modern cities, most people barely breathe. Their chests tighten, their diaphragms forget their dance, and the body becomes an armor holding the anxiety of a world that runs on inertia. To breathe is to remember that you are not what you lack, not what you achieve, not what hurts. You are what remains when all that is gone. And what remains is simple, a body still wanting to live, asking for a chance to be at peace with itself. They say the Buddha reached enlightenment under a tree, but it's rarely said that he did so by observing his breath, without resistance, without intervention, just being, just staying. Isn't it curious that the most transcendent thing was also the simplest? Neuroscience now confirms what the ancients always knew. When you breathe slowly and deeply, you activate your parasympathetic system, regulate emotions, reduce stress, and connect with brain regions that spark creativity, memory, and compassion. What the mystics intuited, science now explains with graphs and data. But the mystery remains the same. To breathe is to become human again. In a corner of Japan, There is an old man who teaches meditation at a bus stop. He charges nothing. He just sits there every afternoon, and when someone asks what he's doing, he says, "I'm remembering how to be at home while I wait for what may never come." This man doesn't seek followers. He doesn't want to teach. He just breathes with such grace that he inspires others to pause. And in that pause, something shifts. Something realigns, as if, finally, we were living from the inside and not just surviving from the outside. Noise culture has confused presence with productivity. But self-love does not begin when you achieve something. It begins when you don't need to do anything to feel worthy. And breathing with love is that, stopping the demands to simply acknowledge yourself, like a child who knows they are loved without having to behave. Do you remember the last time you took a deep breath just because? Not from anxiety, not from physical effort, not as a technique, but because you needed it like someone needing to return home. This world has celebrated those who run, who produce, who demand from themselves until they break. But a new generation is beginning to awaken, one that understands we didn't come here just to perform. We came to feel, to inhabit, to love without armor. And for that, the first tool is not an idea or a therapy or a plan. It is the breath, that sacred act that asks for no permission, but invites full attention. And there, right there, is where everything begins. In a corner of the world where few ever look, something happened worth remembering. A young street musician played every day on a corner of the Gothic Quarter in Barcelona. He didn't ask for money. He just closed his eyes and played. And every note from his guitar seemed to match the rhythm of the wind. Some passed by without noticing. Others stopped, as if under a spell. But no one knew that this boy had severe anxiety, that he could only feel at peace when he breathed to the rhythm of his own fingers, that he had learned to master his mind not in a meditation center, but by breathing through every chord he invented. Because for him, music wasn't art, it was oxygen. And so it goes for all who have made self-love their spiritual practice, not as a nice idea said in front of a mirror, but as something concrete, real, vital. To breathe love is that. To not abandon the body when the noise outside gets too loud. It is to stay. It is to listen without judgment. It is to resist the urge to run outward and choose to remain inside one moment longer. But staying inside is not always pleasant. Sometimes it's where fear lives, and rage, and guilt, and the unspoken. That's why it's so important to understand that breathing is not only about calming down. It is often the only bridge between inner chaos and the chance to truly understand yourself. Watch how children breathe when they sleep. Their bellies rise, their bodies loosen. There is no pretense, no tension. They don't need techniques. They come connected from the start. It's the adults who forget, the ones who trade the art of breathing for the urgency of proving. And yet, some cultures have kept this wisdom alive. In traditional Chinese medicine, vital energy is called qi, and it flows more freely when the body breathes fully. In Sufi tradition, breath accompanies the whirling dances, leading to mystical ecstasy. In Japanese Zen, every breath is an opportunity to empty the ego. In Andean practices, they say the breath of the world enters through the nose and becomes sami, sacred energy. And what do we do in our concrete cities? We live as if oxygen were just another resource, as if its only purpose were to keep us standing. But there are people, like you, who have begun to suspect there's more, that the body doesn't just want to stay alive, it wants to be awake. It wants to remember it was born to feel joy. And this is where the pause comes in, not as an interruption, but as a ceremony. The pause you take before responding in anger. The pause you practice before judging yourself. The pause you gift yourself when something hurts and you don't yet have words for it. That pause is love in the form of space. and the air that enters it is the oldest medicine in the world. Did you know that Tibetan monks, before teaching any philosophy, first observe how you breathe? They say that if your breath is trapped, so is your soul. And until you learn to release it, you can't truly receive wisdom. Because a closed mind is the one that doesn't breathe, and an open mind is the one that breathes with gratitude, even when no obvious reason appears. Frida Kahlo knew this too. She painted through her pain like someone breathing underwater. Her wounded body taught her that art can be a long sigh in the middle of suffocation, that when there's no air outside, you can search for it within, and turn it into colors, into words, into light. Breathing love is not about breathing beautifully. It's about breathing truthfully, with the body you have today, with the emotion you're feeling now, even if it's not loving, even if it hurts. Because self-love is not about liking yourself all the time. It's about not leaving when you don't. It's easy to care for yourself when you feel good. The difficult and sacred thing is to stay when the body trembles, when the mind invents monsters, when sadness visits like a rude old friend. Right there, in that exact place, you can work magic, not by breathing to escape it, but by breathing to stay, to embrace it until it no longer needs to scream. And then something shifts. The body is no longer an enemy. The mind is no longer a tyrant. Time is no longer an executioner. They become allies, companions, because you have chosen to bear witness. You have chosen to be present. And that's where everything begins. In a corner of the world where few ever look, something happened worth remembering. A taxi driver in New Delhi drove 12 hours a day. He never meditated. He never read a self-help book. But he had one habit. Every time he stopped at a red light, he closed his eyes for 3 seconds and breathed deeply. When someone asked him why, he said, "Because if I don't, I'm not the one driving. It's the fatigue, the anger, the whole world. And if I lose my breath, I lose my way." That quiet practice was his way of existing with dignity, of not letting the city swallow him whole. He didn't know he was meditating, but he was, because real meditation isn't announced, it's embodied. Many people believe meditating is about turning off the mind, becoming Zen, sitting in the perfect posture, seeking a teacher, a mantra, a method. But meditation, in its most essential root, is returning home. It is being where you are, without resistance, without escape, with the heart beating and the body breathing as witnesses to the everyday miracle of being alive. And what's most fascinating is that this inner home is not some mystical place. It is the body itself, the very space so many seek to escape, and which yet holds the key to peace. Watch how monks walk in the temples of Korea, slow, soft, without destination. Not out of laziness, but because they know every step holds the value of a prayer, that every inhalation is a vow of presence, that speed is not efficiency, it is forgetfulness. Watch how an old man dances in a plaza in Havana, eyes closed, arms open, soul barefoot. He doesn't care about technique. His choreography is a sigh, and that sigh is art, and that art is medicine. Because he understands that moving from joy is a form of prayer without words. And there, right there, we understand that self-love is not a concept to defend. It is a practice to be breathed, a pause between demand and tenderness, a surrender that doesn't defeat you, it frees you. Modern psychology has started calling it emotional regulation, mindfulness, compassionate neuroplasticity. Science, once again, is translating what sages have said for centuries, that the body that breathes with love doesn't break, it transforms, that the one who pauses does not give up, they rise. And at this point, the question is worth asking. How many times a day do you breathe from fear, from tension, from the urgency to fix something? And how many times, honestly, do you breathe as someone who gives themselves permission to exist? There lies the crack where light enters. in that subtle difference between breathing to continue and breathing to feel, breathing to connect with the sacred that lives in the most ordinary things, your body, your story, your present moment. Creation is not a gift for the chosen few. It is the breath existence placed in every body that breathes. Creating is not painting a canvas, writing a poem, or founding a company. Creating is a gesture, a look that chooses tenderness, a silence that chooses presence, a no that heals, a yes that frees, a pause where urgency used to live. Every time a human being dares to not repeat the script they inherited, they are creating. Every time someone listens instead of defending, embraces instead of fleeing, feels instead of disconnecting, they are giving birth to a new way of being alive. Creativity is not an act of talent. It is an act of love for possibility, of love for the unknown, of love for that part of you that has not yet revealed itself. And that's why it's not about making perfect things. It's about being willing to be born. Because only those who dare to create, dare to breathe fully. And only those who breathe fully are truly here. Breath is the soul's first creative act, and its last. Everything else is art. The Stoics, who lived among the noise of Rome and the fall of empires, knew this better than anyone. Epictetus said, "We are not disturbed by what happens, but by our opinion about what happens." And that opinion loses strength when you breathe from presence, when you allow the body to have the last word, not the judgment, not the fear, not the past, but the breath. And from that awareness, life begins to change, not dramatically, not with fireworks. It changes the way light shifts when the clouds part just a little, the way the sea changes when the storm gets tired, the way the chest changes when, without realizing it, you're no longer holding your breath, but letting it flow. There is a woman in Oaxaca who teaches children how to bake bread, not as a task, but as a way to teach them how to live. First, you breathe the wheat, she tells them. Then you feel the dough, and finally, you give thanks for the heat of the oven. Her students don't always understand, but you see them go quiet. You see them holding their bread in their hands, smelling, knowing without knowing, because love enters like that, like a fragrance that needs no explanation. And if you think about it, everything that matters enters through there. The scent of an embrace, the shared laughter, the breeze of an unhurried afternoon, the memory of someone who loved you when you didn't yet know how to love yourself. That is the kind of love taught by breath, not the one that demands, not the one you earn, but the one that simply is. And that love, when practiced like one breathes with intention, begins to heal things you didn't even know were broken. In a corner of the world where few ever look, something happened worth remembering. A young Chilean was crossing India by train, carrying a backpack full of books and a hollow in his chest that not even the poetry of Neruda or Mistral could name. He had spent weeks searching for answers, hopping from ashram to ashram, from retreat to retreat, trying postures, mantras, strict schedules, and enforced silences. Until, tired of the search, he sat beneath a tree in Rishikesh, leaned his back against the trunk, closed his eyes, and without realizing, stopped searching. He simply breathed, for the first time in years, without intention, without technique, without expectation. And it was there, in that unguarded pause, that he felt his body was not a prison, but a temple. That pain was not punishment, but a messenger. That life was not a path to conquer, but a breath to honor. That's what we forget, that we are already here, that it's not about arriving, it's about feeling, that the miracle is not at the end of the tunnel, but in the air moving through your nostrils as you read this. Breathing is not just about oxygen, it's about how we relate to existence. And learning to breathe love is remembering that every cell in your body responds not only to what you eat or think, but to how fully you inhabit the moment. The Taoist sages knew it. speaking of the breath of heaven as a bridge between the invisible and the human. The Tibetan monks knew it, training the mind through the loving control of breath. The yogis knew it, teaching how to breathe from the base of the spine, like lighting a sacred lamp. And science knows it now too, showing how deep breathing reduces cortisol, regulates the nervous system, and reactivates neuroplasticity. But there's still something science can't measure: what awakens when you breathe from the soul. You don't need to be a sage, you just need to pause, like Marie Curie stepping out into the garden mid-research to watch how the light fell on the leaves, like John Lennon sitting in silence for long minutes before recording a song. Like an old Portuguese man I once met in Porto who told me, "I don't meditate, I just listen to what's alive." Because that's what the world is missing, listening to what is alive. We live anesthetized by speed, trained to accumulate, perform, and stand out. And in all that noise, we lose what matters most: the feeling of being at home in our own body. When was the last time you breathed like you deserve to be here? And I'm not talking about a 10-day retreat or chanting Sanskrit mantras in a deep voice. I'm talking about something more intimate, more revolutionary, something you can do while waiting for the train, washing a dish, hugging your mother, or closing your eyes before sleep. There's a woman in Istanbul who sits every afternoon on a bench overlooking the Bosphorus. She doesn't look at her phone. She doesn't dwell on her problems. She just watches the clouds move and breathes. Her family says she's strange, that she's wasting time. But she's discovered something thousands haven't yet grasped: that losing time is sometimes the only way to find yourself. Breathing love is not a romantic metaphor. It's a practice. It's gifting yourself a moment of tenderness in the midst of pressure. It's making each inhalation an internal caress. It's allowing life to pass through you without filters. And in that act, something appears that logic cannot explain: intuition. Osho said, intuition is pure intelligence, without interference. That when thinking stops, knowing emerges like a spring. James Clear, from a different lens, says our habits shape who we are and who we become. But both, without knowing it, are pointing to the same river, the one formed by small sacred decisions we make each day to return to ourselves, to breathe, to pause, to listen, not as techniques, but as everyday rituals. That is the new luxury. In a world obsessed with performance, surrendering to stillness is a revolutionary act. And from that surrender, something new is born: the sacred minute. The sacred minute is a commitment to yourself. It has no set time or place. It only requires intention. To pause for 60 seconds, close your eyes, and feel that you are here. That air enters and leaves. That your chest rises and falls. That your body is alive, and that you, beyond your name, your debt, your wound, are still breathing. That minute can change your day. And if it becomes a habit, it can change your life. Because what we lack is not more information, it's more awareness. And awareness isn't learned, it's remembered, it's breathed, it settles in, like music that's always been playing, but that you had forgotten to hear. In a corner of the world where few ever look, something happened worth remembering. A 7-year-old boy cried uncontrollably in the bathroom of a school in Cartagena de Indias. It wasn't the first time. That morning he had forgotten a homework assignment, and his teacher, tired of his distractions, had humiliated him in front of the class. But that wasn't the true wound. The true wound was that when he looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, he didn't recognize himself. And instead of yelling, instead of breaking something, he just stood there, trembling. Then something extraordinary happened. He placed his hand on his chest, closed his eyes, and began to breathe, just as he had seen his grandmother do when she was angry, just as his mother did when she stared silently out the window. He breathed, and for a moment, the world stopped being heavy. That moment became the seed of a man who would later dedicate his life to teaching thousands of children to meditate in public schools, not with incense or mystical speeches, with silence, with presence, with body, with truth. Because breathing doesn't cure everything, but it opens the door for healing to begin. When we talk about love, we imagine grand gestures, cinematic romances, or perfect words spoken at perfect moments. But there's a purer, quieter, more lasting kind. Love as an act of presence. Love as the ability to stay without judgment, to remain without trying to fix, to look without controlling, to listen without preparing a reply. And that kind of love isn't learned from books. It's trained in the body, in the breath, in the pause. There's a woman in Krakow who visits her mother every Sunday. Her mother has Alzheimer's. She no longer recognizes her. She often mistakes her for a nurse, but the daughter never misses a visit. She sits by her side, strokes her hands, talks about her childhood, sings old songs, and when words fall short, she breathes with her, slowly, deeply, as if with each breath she could help her remember who she was, who she is, who she still is. That too is meditation, not on a mountaintop, not with a straight spine and closed eyes, but right there where the soul is asking for presence. Because meditation is not about clearing the mind, nor is it about escaping pain. Quite the opposite. It's about staying, moving through, allowing, making the body a safe place to feel what hurts without losing peace. And that takes courage. Not the courage of a hero, but the courage of a human being who sits on the edge of their bed at night and says to themselves, "I'm here." And that's enough for today. There are places in the world where silence is part of the architecture. In Kyoto, traditional houses are built with materials that absorb sound, not for aesthetic reasons, but out of respect. In Bhutan, monks walk barefoot so as not to disturb the rest of the earth. In Iceland, gardens are designed around rocks because it's believed that invisible spirits live there. All of this arises from an ancient understanding that life doesn't need to be explained, only inhabited. And the only way to inhabit it is to breathe it with reverence. When you begin to practice the pause, the world transforms. Not because things outside change, but because you finally have room inside to receive them. A deep breath before speaking can prevent a fight. A pause before deciding can save you a year of regret. A minute of silence facing the sea can return to you the soul you lost in the rush of obligations. And you don't need to make this a solemn ritual. It's enough to remember it in simple moments, while pouring coffee, tying your shoes, walking to work. Beauty is waiting everywhere, but only those who pause will see it. There's an artist in Lagos who only paints when it rains. She says the sound of water on the roof reminds her that the world keeps turning even when she does nothing, and that in that soft noise, the soul finds its place. Her art doesn't sell in galleries, but it hangs on the walls of dozens of homes that needed a painting to help them not give up. And that's what we do when we breathe love. We stop worshiping duty and start building an altar to what matters. There are days when you wake up with the feeling that something's missing, even though everything is there. A hot breakfast, unanswered messages, clean clothes. But something's not quite right. A kind of silence beneath the noise, like an empty chair at the center of a party, something calling for your presence without speaking. And then you remember, without knowing how, that it's been too long since you listened to life inside your body. Not to analyze it, not to organize it, but to listen to it. Breathing love is just that. Letting the body say what the ego censors, making space to feel what your schedule ignores. It's an almost rebellious act, because in a world that rewards haste, choosing to pause is a form of silent revolution. There's a story I've always found absurd and profoundly human. In New York, a Wall Street executive was diagnosed with chronic stress at the age of 43. His doctor prescribed meditation. He laughed. But, curious, he signed up for a Buddhist retreat in Vermont. On the first day, they asked him to walk silently through the forest for an hour. On the second day, to contemplate a rock for 15 minutes. On the third day, to simply breathe. By the fourth day, he left, said he couldn't bear to do nothing. 2 years later, he was found working as a gardener at a rural school. Not because he failed, but because he finally understood he didn't need to conquer the world. He needed to come home to his own. That's real transformation. Not moving to a new city, not giving it all up, but changing your relationship with the present. And it starts with the breath. Because when you breathe with attention, the edges of life soften. Wounds stop bleeding. Mistakes stop being life sentences. And the beauty you thought was lost begins to show up in small things. The smell of bread, a child's laughter, the shadow of trees on the sidewalk. There's a Japanese poet, Kobayashi Isa, who lost his wife and 4 children. His haikus don't speak of suffering in a tragic tone. They speak of snails climbing mountains, of droplets falling on petals, of sorrow dissolving with the patience of time. He breathed in every line, not to forget, but to remember more gently. And that teaches us something. It's not about avoiding pain, but learning how to breathe through it, with dignity, with beauty, with soul. Art born from that place needs no explanation. Look at Billie Holiday. Every note she sang carried the weight of her nights, but also the grace of someone who chose not to give up. She breathed before each phrase as if the world were about to end, and she could save it with a melody. And maybe she did. We can breathe that way too, as those with no rush, as those who understand that loving isn't about doing more, but about being more. And here comes something essential. Breathing love also means letting go of pretending. Pretending it doesn't hurt, that it doesn't matter, that nothing's wrong. The body stores it all, the disappointments, the unsaid words, the renunciations we didn't even know were renunciations. And if we don't let the body speak, it will find its own way, through insomnia, tension, anxiety. But when we breathe consciously, we're telling the body, I'm here with you. I'm not leaving you alone. And that's a form of love that heals more than 1,000 words. Somewhere in Mexico City, an old man has been fixing watches for 50 years. When asked if he ever gets tired of doing the same thing, he said no, because every watch he repairs is a way of stopping time and remembering that life isn't measured in hours, but in well-lived moments. That's what this journey invites us to do. Not to take giant steps, but to inhabit the small ones, to feel the wind on our face, the ground beneath our feet, the voice of someone saying our name with affection. In the end, love is not a theory. It's a silent practice that begins with one breath and is sustained by gratitude. Sometimes just seeing a dog scratch its ear with the confidence of a king is enough to remember that life isn't so bad, that the world won't collapse because we didn't know what to do with it today, that eternity isn't measured in years but in seconds when everything suddenly makes sense, without needing to explain why. We say we want peace, but we fear silence. We say we want love, but distrust it when it arrives effortlessly. We say we want freedom, but cling to familiar cages. Isn't it funny? If life were a movie, this part would be a comedy. And you, the protagonist, stumbling over your own shadow while searching for the light with a flashlight you forgot to turn on. Breathing love is remembering that the universe doesn't need permission to embrace you, just an open window, a little loosened grip on your schedule, your guilt, your need to have it all figured out. Because between you and me, nobody knows anything. Not the sages in India, not the mindfulness influencers. All they know is that breathing helps, and that laughing, oh brother, laughing saves. There's a woman in Florence, 87 years old, who goes out every day to feed the neighborhood cats. She wears red, even when it rains. When asked why, she said, "Because life already wears enough black." That answer is worth more than 100 spiritual retreats. It's street philosophy, undiplomated psychology, wisdom bottled in joy. And so you realize, love isn't a formula, it's a way of seeing beauty in absurdity, poetry in the everyday, miracles in the minuscule. It's understanding that you don't need to wait for everything to be okay to start living as if it already is. A friend once attended a meditation workshop but left on the second day because the facilitator talked more than he did. "I came here to silence myself, not to listen to you," he said. He went to the park, sat under a tree, closed his eyes and listened to his breath for the first time in years, and he cried, not from sadness, from reunion, as if he'd finally said hello to himself after decades of chasing everything but him. That's what meditation is, greeting the one inside when no one else is knocking on the door. And yes, life hurts. Of course it does, but it also makes you laugh until you fall to the ground. And both things are okay. Breathing love is allowing them to coexist, letting pain and joy share the same room without fighting, letting fear be not an enemy, but an alarm you can switch off without smashing it, letting your soul sing, even off-key. In the streets of Marrakech, a white-bearded shoemaker sings while he works. He doesn't sing because life is perfect. He sings because he discovered that if he doesn't, his mind screams. And he chose melody over noise. Choosing to breathe love is that, singing to life even if you're out of tune, dancing even if people stare, living even if the world says it's not the time. Do you know what happens when you breathe with awareness? The mind quiets for a moment. The body feels heard. And that changes everything. It's not a miracle cure. It's a door, one that opens toward yourself, toward the only place you've truly longed to return to. And yes, we can talk about techniques, philosophies, ancient wisdom, but if we can't laugh at ourselves, what's the point? If we can't look at our contradictions with tenderness, why so much theory? A Zen master once said, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. But maybe after enlightenment, you sing while chopping wood. And you thank the water for its freshness. That's it. Nothing changes, but you do." What if everything you're searching for isn't a goal, but a pause? What if fulfillment has nothing to do with getting more, and everything to do with resisting less? Learning to breathe love is just that, surrendering with elegance, not running, not fighting, just being, just showing up, breathing so fully that the world has to go silent just to hear you. Sometimes the greatest teachers don't wear robes or speak in temples. Sometimes they're the grandparents watering their plants slowly. Sometimes they're the kids laughing with a mouthful of mud. Sometimes it's you, in that strange moment where you feel neither lost nor found, but fully present. When you don't know what to do, but you know you're here. And that's enough. On a dirty street corner in New York, across from a Starbucks that never closes, a homeless man swept the sidewalk with a broken branch. He did it with a concentration that felt sacred. He didn't ask for money. He didn't speak. He just swept up cigarette butts, crumpled receipts, and still warm paper cups. A businessman stopped for a moment, puzzled. "Why are you doing that?" he asked. The man looked up calmly and said, "Because someone has to return dignity to this place, even if just for a few minutes." And he kept sweeping. He didn't say it with anger or with resignation. He said it like someone who's understood something others haven't yet seen, like someone who knows that love isn't always shouted, it's sometimes swept. Sometimes it spreads through gestures no one records, no one applauds, no one expects, and yet they transform. That scene isn't in any mindfulness manual. It's not part of personal development speeches. It's in real life, in the kind of poetry that's never printed, in that kind of wisdom that doesn't need a temple because it found its altar in the asphalt. We often think love is a peak, a distant place we have to reach. But love isn't up there. It's here, where the road begins. It's in the way we breathe when we're alone, in how we speak to ourselves when no one's watching, in whether or not we open our bodies to a new day. Love isn't a prize, it's a practice. And yet, we've wrapped it in layers of fear, as if only the brave deserved it, as if we had to earn it through effort, as if it were something to win, not something to recognize. That's why so many don't know how to receive it, because they were taught it like a test, not a native language. What we forget is that love doesn't need explanation. It needs space. When we force it to look perfect, we suffocate it. When we confuse it with need, we weaken it. When we use it as a mask, we empty it. To love is not to say, "I love you," or to write verses. It's staying. It's listening. It's not correcting. It's not running when someone breaks down in front of you. It's seeing another human being in their truth and not crossing the street. And above all, it's being able to do all that with yourself. Sometimes the soul doesn't need advice. It needs a hug. Sometimes the body doesn't need more words. It needs rest. Sometimes the heart isn't broken. It's just exhausted from begging for permission to beat. That's why this book isn't an answer. It's a mirror. And each chapter, a breath. Each word, a crack where the light can enter. And now, a story. One of those no one tells out loud, but many live in silence. A story that happened, and that happens every day, everywhere. In a small apartment in Caracas, surrounded by gray buildings, lives Julia, 43, mother of 2, art teacher in a public school. She doesn't post inspiring quotes on Instagram. She doesn't do yoga at dawn. She doesn't give life advice. She's just trying to survive with dignity. Every morning she wakes up at 5:30, prepares breakfast, gets the kids dressed, rushes them to school. Then she takes 2 buses to get to a school where the desks are broken and the salaries frozen. Julia loves teaching, but it's been a while since she felt like she really teaches. The kids are tired, disconnected, glued to screens. She tries to bring them art, but they just want to forget the world, and so does she. When she gets home, she cooks, does laundry, checks homework, tries to be present. But at night, when everyone's asleep, she locks herself in the bathroom, sits on the edge of the tub, and cries. Not out of sadness, she says. She cries so she doesn't harden. She has a partner, or so she thinks. Someone who comes when he wants, stays when he can, and doesn't ask how her day went. Sometimes he brings wine. Sometimes he doesn't look at her, and she doesn't confront him, because she's afraid of being alone, afraid of not being able to pay rent, afraid her kids will see that their mother has no answers. One night, Julia looked in the mirror. She had dark circles, tangled hair, a worn-out body. But something made her stop, her own breath. She was panting. She hadn't run. She hadn't cried. She simply didn't know how to breathe. She realized she'd spent years holding in air, living with a closed chest. That night, she didn't do anything extraordinary. No therapy, no mantras. She just sat on the floor, closed her eyes, and breathed. For the first time in a long time, she breathed without fear. And when she exhaled, something inside her broke. But it wasn't a wound, it was a lock. Since then, every night she gives herself 10 minutes. 10 minutes just for her, to feel her body, to do nothing, to cry if she needs to laugh if she can, just to be. She hasn't changed the world, but the world within her has started to bloom. Today, when she walks into her classroom, her students are still disconnected. But she no longer tries to save them. She simply tries to plant beauty, a phrase, a brushstroke, a breath, because she understood that love cannot be imposed. It can only be offered. That is the kind of wisdom you breathe, not learned through effort, but through surrender. Breathing love is seeing poetry in what's never written, music in what makes no sound, miracles in what no one expects. It's allowing life to speak to you through ordinary objects, everyday people, and the unrecorded silences. And no, it's not a secret formula. There are no steps, no guarantees, only the decision to be more awake, to breathe more slowly, to judge less, and be more tender. To understand that everything that comes your way isn't here to punish you or test you, but to accompany you. One day, someone who had lost everything told me, "At least now I have less to carry," and smiled. That smile, my friend, held more wisdom than 1,000 lectures, because it came from a broken heart that chose to sing anyway. Life doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be real, to be so honest with yourself that you can laugh at your contradictions without losing tenderness, to sit before your own chaos without trying to dress it up, to hug yourself like you would a crying child who doesn't know why they're crying. Because deep down, that's all of us. Children who don't quite know how to live, but keep trying. And precisely that is the greatest act of love. Breathing love is letting go of constant self-demands. It's releasing the never-ending evaluations. It's stopping the thought that you must prove something, that you have to earn something, that you must do more to be embraced by life. No, that's done. You already deserve it. You already are it. It's accepting that sometimes you'll be tired, confused, sad. And that's also part of being alive. That you don't need to justify your existence or decorate it. That you can simply sit down, close your eyes, and breathe. Because by doing so, you're affirming, "I'm still here." And that is sacred. Throughout the centuries, many cultures have spoken of breath as the bridge between body and spirit. In Hebrew, ruach means breath and also spirit. In Greek, pneuma. In Latin, spiritus. Breathing is not just biology. It's a ritual, a connection, a reminder that there is something invisible holding you, even when everything visible seems to fall apart. And if that's not love, then what is? Breathing love is remembering you are in a constant dance with the invisible, that the air you exhale mingles with the trees, the oceans, and others, that you are not alone, you never were, that each breath is a sacred act of communion with the world, with life, with yourself. So laugh. Yes, laugh. Laugh fully, loudly, with tears if needed, because laughter also cleanses, also restores, also heals. Laughter is poetry from the lungs, the song of awareness when it recognizes itself as absurd, yet still beautiful. The joyful surrender of someone who understands they don't have it all figured out, but have it all open. And keep going. Keep living like someone who knows that every day is a gift wrapped in routine, that every conversation might be a doorway, that every person, no matter how closed off, carries a story that could unravel you, that every pain, even the most useless one, can become a bridge if you dare to cross it. Breathing love is this: crossing bridges between who you were and who you're becoming, between what you expected and what appeared, between what you dreamed and what you now need. It's living with an exposed heart, but not a defenseless one. It's walking with open hands, knowing that sometimes they'll be left empty, but other times they'll be filled with things you never knew you were searching for. In a corner of the world where few ever look, something happened that's worth remembering. An 8-year-old boy walked up to his grandfather's coffin and, instead of crying, whispered something that made every adult at the wake tremble. He said, "Thank you for teaching me how to walk with my hands in my pockets and my heart out front." No one knew where he got that phrase. Some thought he had read it somewhere. Others believed the grandfather had once said it. But the truth is, it came from him, from the child, from that mystery we all carry inside, which only reveals itself when love and grief meet without warning. There are truths that don't need to be explained, only felt, and that is the nature of love when it's seen with an unguarded forehead. It doesn't need flowers or dates or promises, just presence, just gratitude, just silence, because everything else, the words, the gestures, even the memories, are merely ways we try to hold on to what was already given to us. The unrepeatable gift of having shared breath with another living being. That grandfather was gone. But his laugh, the way he scratched his head when he was thinking, his silence by the sea, the way he sliced watermelon with a small knife, all of it was still breathing in that child's body, in his memory, in his voice, in the way he said thank you. And if you've ever asked yourself what it means to live with love, maybe the answer isn't hidden in grand theories or exotic practices, but in learning to see your own life as an act of radical gratitude. Gratitude for existence, for the body, for the air, for the sound of leaves falling when no one is watching. Gratitude for the mistakes, for the clumsiness, for the foolishness that made us wiser, for the loneliness that taught us to speak to ourselves with kindness. We spend our lives waiting for signs when, in truth, what we lack is not direction, it's gentleness, with ourselves, with what we've been, with what we don't yet understand. It's incredible how the experience of being alive changes when we stop demanding explanations and start telling ourselves a different story. What if the meaning of your life isn't something you have to find, but something you're already expressing every time you breathe with love? Some people search for answers in sacred books. Others find them in temples or laboratories. But there are also those who, like you, understand that life feels closest to the miraculous when we learn to inhabit ourselves, to sit down for a while without thinking of anything, to feel the heartbeat without asking questions, to eat without guilt, to say, "I don't know," without feeling like we've failed. It's strange. The world celebrates knowledge, but what truly heals is permission. Permission to not know. Permission to cry on a staircase without explanation. Permission to change your mind without betraying your essence. Permission not to shine all the time, to not have a clear calling, to not fit in. True love begins there, not where someone else loves you, but where you stop demanding to be someone else, where you embrace yourself with your eyes closed and decide, without drama or euphoria, that this body, this story, this life is already enough to begin dancing. And that dance has no exact steps. It doesn't follow an outside rhythm. It doesn't need a stage. Sometimes it's a conversation that leads nowhere. Sometimes it's a song playing in the market that makes your shoulders sway without you noticing. Sometimes it's that moment when you laugh alone, remembering something silly you did years ago. And you don't judge yourself. You just laugh. Because there, right there, you're free. There comes a moment in life when you don't need answers, just air. Not an explanation, just a pause. Not a technique, just a sigh that doesn't hurt. That moment arrives unannounced. Sometimes it shows up in the middle of a noisy street, other times in a quiet dawn or in a conversation that's lost all meaning. And when it arrives, the only thing you can do, if you've learned to listen, is breathe. But not like before, not mechanically, but consciously, as an act of love. Breathing love is not a concept, it's a secret practice, a way of telling your body, "I see you," a way of telling your soul, "I'm here," a way of being in the world without running from yourself. Because we run a lot, from anxiety, from emotions, from time, from memories. And in that fleeing, we forget the only thing that has never left us: breath. There are people who have nothing, but when they breathe, something settles. Others have everything, but their breathing is trapped. And then they understand that without inner space, the external becomes noise. True abundance begins when air enters without fear, when breath becomes refuge. A simple practice can change everything. It doesn't require years of study or a mountain retreat, just willingness, just presence, just the humble desire to return. Close your eyes. Inhale slowly through your nose. Count to 5, not because you must, but because you can. Feel the air coming in. Feel it embracing you from within. Feel it carrying the weight of the week, the year, the past. Exhale gently. Let go of control. Let go of the idea that you have to achieve something, and stay there, in that moment. No promises, no rush. You can do this once a day, or 5, or when your soul hurts and you don't know how to ask for help. You can do it in the middle of a grocery store, in the bathroom, in the car. You can do it as a secret ritual, as a prayer that needs no words. Your body will remember because it knows. It always knew. It just needed you to remember too. Sometimes it helps to give form to the invisible, as if the soul asked for a map, even if it won't follow it exactly. So here are a few recipes, not instructions, not steps, recipes, like the ones you find on a wrinkled scrap of your grandmother's paper, not written in ink, written in love. If one helps you, keep it. If one doesn't, release it with gratitude. There are no rules here, only options. Recipe for heavy days. Wake up slowly, don't rush. Place one hand on your chest and the other on your belly. Feel the first breath of the day. Before the coffee, breathe love. Before the phone, breathe tenderness. Before the world, feel alive. Recipe for when fear tightens. Find a place where you can be alone for a few minutes. Rest your back. Close your eyes. Imagine each inhalation filling you with light and each exhalation carrying fear away, not as an enemy, but as an old guest who has served their purpose. Thank the fear. Let it go. Breathe without it. Recipe for self-love. Walk slowly, not to arrive, to feel. Listen to your breath as you move. Walk as if you're walking over yourself without wounding, as if your steps were caresses to the earth that holds you. Breathe gratitude for everything you already are, not for what you've achieved, for what you've survived, for how you keep loving despite it all. Recipe before bed. Lie down as if surrendering to the sky. Breathe deeply 3 times. Don't think of anything. Just feel the air entering and leaving, like waves coming and going, as if the universe were breathing you. Let yourself go, without judgment, without hurry, without guilt. The body knows when it starts to change. It doesn't announce it. It just does. The rhythm slows. The mind clears. Life becomes a little more livable. And that's when you understand that breath was always the portal, not to another dimension, to this one, to this life, to this flesh, to this possibility of being. How many times have we seen Keanu Reeves sitting alone on a bench? He's been photographed 1,000 times there. No one knows what he's thinking. No one knows if he's sad or at peace. But there's something in his gaze that needs no explanation. Something in his posture that doesn't try to look strong. He's just there, breathing, in silence, in presence, as if he knew something others had forgotten, as if he understood that, in the end, everything comes down to this, to being with what is, without dressing it up, without denying it, without running. He once said, with the simplicity only those who've crossed hell without turning into lava or stone can have, be kind, for you never know what someone else is going through. And that kindness begins with oneself, with breathing without demand, with being without disguise, with living without so much defense. Imagine the world begins to change not with great speeches, but with millions of people breathing love amid the chaos. Imagine a child learning to calm down by feeling his breath. A mother who, instead of yelling, takes a deep breath and finds different words. An old man who doesn't feel alone because his breath still reminds him he is life. A couple who, in the midst of an argument, pause and breathe together. That's not taught in universities. It won't appear in the news. But that's where the revolution lies. The real one. The one that begins in the air and ends in the soul. Breath is not a luxury. It's a language. And you just remembered it. You don't need to understand it all. Just come home. Come back to yourself. Come back to the love hidden in the smallest gesture. A breath that enters and another that leaves, like someone who arrives unannounced and departs without sound. And in that dance, without needing to say it, the soul whispers, "I'm alive." And that is already sacred. We could quote philosophers, saints, neuroscientists, but it's enough to look at someone who laughs with abandon, eats with delight, breathes with tenderness, to understand everything without a word. Truth doesn't always reveal itself at an altar. Sometimes it shows up in a bank line when an old woman touches your arm and says, "You have a beautiful energy," and you don't know why she said it, but you feel it, like a secret blessing. Because in the end, everything we've searched for out there has roots within. Everything we think we're missing is asking for permission to emerge, but it needs space. And space is born when we stop fighting who we are. So maybe today isn't about finding your purpose, but about stopping long enough to see that every breath is already a declaration of love. That every kind gesture, even if no one sees it, changes the chemistry of the universe. That being alive, with everything it entails, is too great a miracle to live distracted. In a corner of the world, where few ever look, something happened that's worth remembering. A 67-year-old woman, with 3 bypasses, 2 divorces, and an unbroken smile, danced alone in front of her bathroom mirror every morning. Not because her life was easy, but because she understood the body is not only made to endure, it's also made to celebrate. She had lost a son. She had touched sorrow with her soul's fingertips. And yet, each day, she turned on the radio and danced, one arm in the air, a tear hanging. Because sometimes, grief and gratitude dance together. What does it mean to love life when it doesn't look like you imagined? What does it mean to be at peace when the world didn't ask your permission to break you? It means breathing without haste. Breathing like someone who accepts the gift without the wrapping, like someone who no longer needs to understand in order to simply be. It means saying, "I am," not as a declaration of power, but as a surrender to the miracle of existing. Like someone who looks at their hands and wonders how something so simple can be so divine. The great sages of the world have said that awakening begins with a single act of presence. Krishnamurti hinted at it with his silence, Yogananda through his meditation, Rumi through his whirling dances, Sai Baba through his reflections, always grounded, always applicable to daily life. Each of them, in their own way, was saying the same thing. You're already home, you just don't know it. And the only thing separating you from that joy is the belief that you have to do something else to deserve it. But there's no need to chase anything, because wholeness isn't achieved, it's remembered. Like when you return to your hometown and realize that the only thing that's changed is the way you see it. Love is like that. It's not a destination, it's a way of seeing. The problem isn't that we don't know how to love, it's that we've confused love with sacrifice, with attachment, with blind devotion, when in truth, to love is to allow existence to move through us without censorship, without that filter of guilt or judgment we inherited from frightened adults. To love is to look at someone and silently say, "You can be yourself here. You don't need to change. You don't need to fit in. Just breathe with me." And that applies to ourselves too. To breathe with ourselves, to stay with ourselves, to walk with ourselves, even on those days when we can't stand who we are, when we feel disappointed, when we speak to ourselves harshly, when we think about giving up. Because those days are part of the temple too. They are the altar. They are the practice. Who said only the brilliant moments are spiritual? Wasn't it the Buddha who awakened under a tree after touching the depths of his own humanity? Wasn't it Mother Teresa who confessed to years of inner darkness while spreading light? Aren't we all a bit saintly and a bit foolish? True growth isn't revealed by how brightly we shine, but by how we treat ourselves when we no longer do. Sometimes love arrives in the form of a 20-minute nap the world told you not to take, or in a quiet, "not today" said with the tenderness of someone who's learned to care for themselves, or in that message you don't send because you know you don't need to be loved by force. Love isn't always epic. Often it's domestic, almost invisible. But right there, in that small, warm space where you choose not to betray yourself, life sings. And it sings with a sweet voice, no sheet music, no hurry. like a grandfather humming a made-up tune to his grandchild, like blood sings when we fall in love without fear, like the soul sings when it recognizes it is still alive. That is love, not intensity, not perfection, not applause, the song, the melody, your own rhythm. Today, maybe, you don't need to learn anything new. Maybe all you need is to remember how you used to breathe as a child when you jumped on the bed without guilt, how you looked at the sky when you didn't know what anxiety was, how you felt eating with your hands without thinking about calories, how you laughed when there was no mirror, no filters, no need for outside approval. There lies your teacher, not in famous quotes, not in underlined books, not in expensive retreats, but in your childhood, in that time when you knew how to be present without needing to be taught. Because your soul always knew, your body always knew, your breath always knew. And you know what's most beautiful? It's never too late to return there. It's never too late to relearn the art of being. It's never too late to place an open hand on your chest and say, I'm here, and that is enough. The greatest act of rebellion in our time is not shouting or protesting. It's sitting in silence, breathing deeply, and asking yourself if you're truly living the life you want, not the one they expect from you, not the one that fits, not the one that impresses, the one that truly vibrates with you, the one that wakes you up without an alarm, the one that looks more like your soul than your resume. There's a quiet urgency, one that never makes the headlines. It's the urgency of feeling alive without needing external stimulation. And this is where love comes in, not as an event, but as a practice. To love is not a romantic accident that happens when someone else shows up. To love is an internal discipline, like stretching at dawn, like returning to yourself when everything screams to distract you. To breathe love is to remember that your heart can still be your home, even when everything around you is falling apart. There was a writer, George Orwell, who, in the midst of harsh totalitarianism, wrote that, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. The same can be said about love. In times of chronic disconnection, to love is the new courage. Love isn't glamorous when practiced alone. It has no likes, no soundtrack, no filters. But it is there, in the ordinary and the silent, where real power begins to bloom. The woman who tends a garden in the middle of urban chaos. The child who feeds a stray dog without knowing anything about ethics or morality. The street musician who sings as if he were performing at the Royal Albert Hall. These people are not fulfilling a duty to love. They are embodying love as a way of being. And that changes the world. Once on a street in London, a homeless man sat beside an old woman who was crying. They didn't speak the same language. He had nothing to offer her but his presence and a cookie. He broke it in half and gave it to her. He didn't say a word, and she stopped crying. In that moment, the universe knew it wasn't entirely lost. There's something deeply subversive about breathing with presence, because the one who breathes cannot lie to themselves, cannot run, cannot pretend to be something they're not. The breath is the only teacher that never leaves us. It's with us from the first second and departs on the last. And yet we ignore it, like we ignore everything that's constant, like we ignore love when it becomes routine. The breath asks for nothing, only to be felt, only to be acknowledged. You don't have to travel to India to learn this. You don't need a robed teacher or lit incense. You just need to close your eyes and feel the air enter and leave, without demanding, without rushing, without promising. Breathing is not a technique. It is a personal revolution that starts in the body and ends in awareness. Some people run marathons searching for the meaning of life, and others find it while washing dishes with attention. Because it's not what you do, it's the place you do it from. And if you do it from love, even sweeping a street becomes a prayer. In a square in Krakow, an elderly violinist plays every day with his eyes closed. He doesn't expect coins. He doesn't seek applause. He just plays. When asked why, he replied, "Because while I play, the world isn't so harsh." That is love, playing the violin in the dust, singing amid the noise, breathing through the chaos, still believing when everything seems broken. You don't need a new version of yourself. You need to return to the original one, the one who arrived without fear, without rush, without the need for validation. The one who breathed love without even knowing it was called that. That version of you is still there, beneath the layers, waiting for you to make space, waiting to be remembered. And it takes nothing more than an instant, a breath, an inner yes to bring it back. The world doesn't need more gurus. It needs more people who have cried silently and still get up to make breakfast with tenderness. It needs people who failed and still believe in beauty. It needs humans who embrace themselves from the soul, who laugh until their stomachs ache, who breathe as if every breath were a prayer, because it is. Every conscious act of living is a tribute to existence, and that is what we are called to remember, that love is not the goal, it is the way, and there's no place to get to except your own heart, that secret place where God and you still have wordless conversations. That place where everything begins again each time you breathe with intention. If you look closely, you'll see that everything valuable in life happens in silence. The tree makes no sound as it grows, the moon doesn't flaunt its beauty, and the heart beats without asking for permission. It's the noise of the world that made you believe love must come with fireworks. But in truth, real love walks barefoot, sits beside you without needing words, and reminds you who you are when everyone else has forgotten. Maybe the problem with this era isn't that love is missing. It's that we've forgotten how to recognize it. We confuse affection with approval, passion with possession, desire with connection. We were taught to seek love like a trophy, when in truth, it's a flame that lights from within, not a medal. Someone hangs around your neck. Do you know what Buddhist monks do when they feel they're losing their patience? They slow down. They breathe more softly. They touch the earth with greater care. They don't accelerate. They don't escape. They surrender to the present the way a child surrenders to play, because they understood that all human suffering is born from resisting what is, and whoever surrenders to the moment, whoever embraces it with gratitude, has already won. There's a Zen anecdote often told by the wise. A disciple asked his master what was the fastest way to reach enlightenment. The master replied, "Wash your dishes as if they were sacred jewels. That's it. No shortcuts, no formulas, just presence, just love poured into whatever you do. Because when you are whole in the act becomes a temple." The woman who sells empanadas and smiles at every customer as if they were her grandchild. The young man who helps an old man cross the street without checking his watch. The father who pauses to play with his child, even with an overflowing inbox. They're not heroes, they're artists, artists of the moment, painters of the everyday using the colors of love. And meanwhile, the world runs. It runs toward goals it quickly forgets, toward titles that won't fit on a headstone. Ideas of success are sold like perfumes, and people buy the illusion that happiness will come when they lose weight, when they marry, when they earn more, when they buy a house, when they're finally recognized. But that when never comes, because postponed happiness becomes a habit. And the habit of postponing life is the saddest kind of death. Breathing love is the antidote, because one who breathes with gratitude breaks time's spell, dismantles the logic of past and future, brings everything into the now. And in the now, there is no lack. There is miracle. There is body. There is soul. There is God. Let's say it clearly. Life owes us nothing. There is no clause that guarantees justice, success, health, or returned love. But every morning, if you're here, if you can move your fingers, if you can read these words, then you've already won. You've received the greatest gift a human being can receive, the opportunity to keep writing your story. There was once a wandering poet named Ryokan. One day, after thieves took everything from his hut, he wrote, "The thief left me the moon in the window." That is what it means to live from inner abundance, not from what you have, but from what you are. Because when the soul is full, scarcity has no place to nest. And that's not something you learn. It's something you remember, and you remember it through breath. When you breathe as if life were a miracle, it becomes one. When you breathe as if you deserve to exist, you do. When you breathe as if each inhale were a poem, you become poetry. We don't need more answers. We need better questions. Who were you before they told you who you were supposed to be? When was the last time you did something just for the joy of it? What part of yourself have you left behind for fear of not fitting in? There is no compass more accurate than joy. Whatever makes you laugh deeply, gives you goosebumps, makes you lose track of time, that's it. That's where. That's the way. And it won't always be productive, profitable, or praised, but it will be real. And real is the only thing that doesn't grow old. We need space for play, for art, for rest. Constant seriousness is a sickness of the soul. Look at children. They breathe with their whole body. They laugh without calculating, cry without shame, live without strategies. That's not ignorance. That's ancient wisdom. It's remembering what we are before the world convinced us we had to become something else. If you can recover even a spark of that innocence, if you can look at the sky with awe again, if you can sit with yourself without needing to distract, then you are not just alive, you are awake. And waking up, in this age, is the greatest gift you can offer humanity. In the end, when the lights go out and no one is watching, when no tasks remain and there's no goal left to chase, all that remains is your breath. That invisible thread that connects you to everything. That intimate breeze that whispers, "You're still here." That no matter what has happened, you still have permission to begin again. Breathing is not just living. It is belonging. It is partaking in the oldest miracle of all, existence. And if, in the middle of the chaos, you ask yourself why you're still here, the answer lies in that small gesture you make without thinking, taking a breath. That act you've repeated millions of times since birth, without being taught. Because we don't need to learn how to breathe. We need to remember how it felt when we did it without fear. You may not know it, but someone is alive today because you offered a smile on their worst day. Because you didn't interrupt their silence. Because you listened with your whole being. Sometimes love is found in what we don't do, in the space we make for others to exist, in the respect that isn't spoken but is lived. That too is love, breathed love. And it's curious. Society trained us to win arguments, not to listen to hearts. It taught us to be brilliant, not kind. It cheers when we climb mountains, but mocks us when we stop to admire the flowers along the path. Strange, isn't it? We live in a world that idolizes speed and dismisses the pause. And yet, the pause is the only thing that brings our soul back. Today we're not here to convince you of anything, or to teach you lessons, only to remind you, you don't have to keep running. It's okay to stop. No one dies from going slower, but many lose themselves for not knowing how to stop. And when you do stop, when you make the present your temple, everything you thought was lost returns. Intuition, calm, laughter, your body. Look around you. Life is not happening on your screen or in future plans. It's happening now. In the way the sun touches your window, in the music drifting up from the street, in the steam still rising from your cup of coffee, waiting for your attention. Life is not hiding. We're the ones who look away. There's a Sufi legend about a man desperately searching for God. He fasted, meditated, went on pilgrimages. Until one day, a wise elder said to him, "You've been looking for him out there so long, you forgot that God is breathing you from within." And that is the great truth. There's no need to climb mountains or cross oceans. You just have to be still, breathe, and let the divine do its work. Because when you breathe love, even pain is transformed. Even loss finds meaning. Even the darkest night becomes a bridge toward the light, not because suffering disappears, but because you learn to dwell in it with dignity, with beauty, with that silent tenderness that needs no explanation. And you know what else happens when you breathe love? You begin to see the sacred in the simple. A tear stops being weakness and becomes cleansing. A hug stops being routine and becomes a vow. A goodbye hurts less because you understand there are no final farewells when love was real. You don't need all the answers, just the right questions. Am I living or merely surviving? Am I listening to my soul or just checking boxes? Am I breathing by reflex or by love? The one who breathes by love needs no destination. Every step is enough. Every day is complete. Every mistake is forgiveness. Every tear is watering. Every silence is a conversation with God. This is not the kind of wisdom you'll find in self-help books. It's not taught in universities. It's not sold in productivity courses. It's something you sense, something you rediscover, something your body remembers, in the sigh after a hard day, in a laugh with no reason, in the whisper of the breeze at the end of the afternoon. Because in the end, no one will ask you how many achievements you collected, how many followers you had, or how much you knew. They'll only ask, did you love? Did you live with your heart open? Did you breathe as if each breath were a gift? And if your answer is yes, then you've already won. Now, drop your shoulders. Let your body soften. There's no rush, no test, no debt. You're alive, and that is everything. May this moment hold you the way the first breath of the day holds the light. And may every new breath be your way of telling the universe, thank you, I'm here, I'm still breathing, and that is already love. This audiobook is just a sacred pause along the way, a silent invitation to see life through new eyes, to breathe each moment as if it were the first. If something you heard lit a spark inside you, don't let it go out. Walk with it. Let it light your soul. You already know that here at Hagase La Luz, we'll keep walking beside you. Here you'll find more paths, more questions worth asking, more words that gently hold your spirit. We'll meet again in the next breath, in the next audiobook. But until then, remember, happiness isn't out there. It's not a trophy or a goal to reach. It's the way you breathe when you found peace. It's the way you love when you no longer fear. It's this moment that asks nothing and still gives you everything. We'll see each other soon,